training stuff, as the slide says, right? So the 5 big cheats that we want to talk about: unilateral knee dominant training. We're going to talk about that again. We're going to talk about making better bilateral choices, what that might involve. We're going to talk about horizontal speed and power work. Okay, we're going to talk about analyzing. We're going to talk a little bit about velocity-based training, and then we're going to talk maybe about some alternatives in terms of vertical power. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. It will all make sense as we go. In terms of moving here, initially we're going to wait because we're going to take, just to make the filming easier, we'll go into the weight room and kind of do a little bit of warm up before we get to some of this stuff, and then go. But I want to try to keep it in order. So from the standpoint of where we're going, the speed development piece is the next big piece. Those of you that are, you may be a little bit bored, but I think you'll still find it interesting. If you're in the personal training world, speed development's not going to be as big a deal. But this is, for us, this is clearly going to be the biggest difference from a programming standpoint. Probably, I would almost go so far as to say ever, in terms of us making a really significant shift in one particular area of the program. And so the number one thought, and these are the things that sort of, as you start going through this process, is that the weight room is vertical and sport is horizontal. That's like a duh, I know thing. But if you think about what we do in the weight room, we're doing 99% vertical up and down stuff. And then we wonder sometimes, gee, people aren't getting faster. It's not translating the way that I want it to horizontal. And you're kind of like, after I started thinking about this, it was very much like, well, that certainly would make a lot of sense. This would explain why we're seeing a really significant change in vertical jumps and not really significant changes in horizontal speed. It's because we are literally getting what we train for, we're getting what we pay for in the gym. And it's easy, because obviously vertical's easy. You know, everything up and down is easy in the weight room. The weight room's set up to do that. It's very space efficient. But when you start looking at the big picture, it's probably not really movement efficient, right? And so this is the big question for me. Is sprinting the Holy Grail? Have we missed the obvious? And I would take a step back and probably say, yeah. I think we have missed the obvious, and we're going to kind of spend a lot of time beating that to death. And this is the biggest difference for me. Like I said, I wrote this down one day. When we used to sprint, so this is what we would do as strength and conditioning coaches. A couple times a year, we would test something, let's just say 40-yard dash. Okay, we're testing the 40-yard dash. And the rest of the year, we're doing all of this programming in the weight room with the hope that it will improve the 40-yard dash. So we were viewing sprinting as a test. We weren't looking at sprinting and saying, wait a second, sprinting is a tool, is a powerful training tool. It was just simply a way for us to measure what we were doing. That is the fundamental shift in my mind, is going from this and saying, wait a second, it's not a test, it's a tool. It's a really powerful training tool that and I won't even say, I was going to say we're probably underutilizing. No, not probably. I would say 99% of us are underutilizing, right? Because it's really interesting. So for me, this book says that I invented combine training. Maybe I did. I don't know if I did. I don't know if I was the first person ever. This guy says I was. But I probably started doing it at roughly the same time as some other people started doing it. But the interesting thing for us is that we knew here, we practiced for the test because the test was really important. So there, when you think about football and the NFL Combine, obviously it's been, this was just draft weekend. The Combine's been in the news. Somebody's ability to run the 40 had a huge amount to do with what amount of money they made, where they were drafted, and whether sometimes if they even got a chance to do it. So we got really good at improving the 40, right? Oh, sorry, I sort of skipped one. I hit it twice. To the point where, like I said, this was Sports Illustrated 1995. Mike Mamula went I got a lot of credit in Sports Illustrated for Mike Mamula being a top 10 draft pick. And it was really based in the fact he ran a 4.58. As a defensive end, 4.58 is still fast, but at that time it was really fast. Thinking this was 1995. He went from being nobody on anybody's radar, junior eligible coming out early, to being, top 10 pick in the NFL draft. And the interesting thing about this is that, so I feel like in 1990, maybe even in 1980, I knew exactly what I know now, except I didn't do it, right? So then, this is Tony Holler. Tony Holler, actually, I think I'm undershooting him now. He's the same age as me. He's a 59-year-old. He is a high school honors chemistry teacher in Illinois. And I stumble on an article by Tony Holler. I think the first one I saw was called Record, Rank, and Publish. And basically what he said is that if you want to get fast, he said you got to make everybody run fast. You got to write down all the times. You got to put them in rank order, and then you got to put that list up on the wall. Now that runs very contrary to a lot of things that I believed a year ago. I don't like ranking people. Because again, I think, like in our business, sometimes it leads to cheating, it leads to bad feelings. There's a lot of negatives sometimes that are associated with ranking, and in the same way with publishing. But the good thing about this, particularly, we're going to go inside and play around with the Broward timer, the data is as clean as you can possibly get. The crazy thing about the Broward timer, and you can talk to all the guys that work at our facility, we are generally, people will run 3 10-yard dashes within 0.01 seconds of each other every day. You'll have a guy run, he runs 151, 152, 151. Like it's really, really good data. So at least you can say there's no way to fudge it. If somebody feels bad, maybe they feel bad. Maybe we're going to have to, particularly with our youth sports performance, we may have to live with some kids realizing that they ran a 1.910. The good thing is, based on what we've been doing right now, we haven't seen a lot of negative associated with that. But the thing that Tony said was how do I get fast? You got to run fast. And that's why I keep going back to this duh kind of thing. But when you think about it, it's incredibly simple. But even though it was incredibly simple, we weren't doing it. So it's one of those, how do I get fast? Run fast. How fast? As fast as you can run. And, how will I know how fast it was? Time it. You think, okay, end of case. We could skip right to the next thing, except we're not going to, right? Steve Bunker. The bad thing about this is why Bunky's picture is up there. He's been telling me this for a decade. He's literally so Tony Holler is a kind of a student or an associate of this guy, Chris Korfist, who's another really smart speed guy that nobody ever hears anything about. Steve had been reading his stuff for years and telling me we really should be timing 10s year round like we did with football. Which leads us to this slide. Laziness leads many people astray. You know why I didn't want to time? Because I was lazy. I didn't like setting up the timer. I thought timer was a pain in the ass. And so I'd be like, no, it's such a pain in the ass to set up the timer. It's way more than we need to do. And my rationale for that was we always ran sprints. We're running sprints anyway. And Steve used to always say, oh, it's different. Steve, raise your hand so they realize you're actually here. But that's Steve right there. But Steve was like, it's different when they're running with the timer. And I was kind of like, yeah, is it really that different? And then what I realized is, yeah, it was really that different. It was game-changingly different if you can make that into a word. And then we go back to this, we talked about this early on, right? What if the way we always did it was wrong? The way we always did it was wrong. The way that we had been doing it for 20 years was wrong. It was incorrect. And there was a better way to do it. And you'll see when we go in there, the better way is so simple that it's ridiculous. And even the timer, I look at now, I can set the timer up probably in 2 minutes now. But initially, it's like, oh, you got to press this button, you got to measure it out. It just seemed to me like this big task that I didn't really think had enough value for me to actually take the time to do. That was a massive mistake. I just love it. You think about what if the way we did everything was wrong, right? This is literally an illustration from an old physical education book. And this is the stuff that we just have to keep reminding ourselves. There's a lot of, not many people have invented the wheel. And the idea that, again, you think about this idea, hey, you want to run fast? Okay, let's run really fast. So, and I showed you this slide, but this was me. After I listened to Tony talk, I was like, I am such a freaking idiot. I cannot believe the amount of time that I have wasted and the amount of not listening that I have done. And, all the boats I missed because I was at the train station. I wasn't even close to the right place. That's the point of this whole thing. I was way off. Right? So as I said, we've always sprinted. Not every day, but 2 days out of the week. If we're in a 4-day week, we always ran sprints. We'd do some kind of 10-yard dash, we'd do some kind of sprint. So it wasn't like sprinting in and of itself was not new to us. But this is the difference, right? So if you're interested in speed at all and you haven't read Charlie Francis' training system, you need to. If you haven't read it in a while, you should read it again because you'll be amazed that it's better the second time than the first. But this was the thing that Charlie said, 95% and above. And what you don't realize, and did I do it here? No, I didn't. I thought I did the math. But when you look at the math, the difference between 90 and 95% is significant. 5% is really significant. It's significant on the timer, particularly when we're talking about the timer being sensitive to 0.01 seconds. Because if you think I got somebody who runs, let's just say 1.5 is a reasonably good 10. That means that 0.15 is 10%, which means 0.075 is 5%. If we had variation of 0.075 from run to run, we'd think we did something wrong. If we had kids that came in and ran 0.075 slower, we'd think we did something wrong. So the point of that is that we get, during the course of the week, we probably get 4 to 6 100% or 99% efforts. That's drastically different than, a 10-yard lean fall run that might have been, God, if we timed it, it might have been 80%. Like I have no idea what we thought was a sprint might have actually been. And this is so elephant in the room. Strength training doesn't impact speed as much as we would like to think. We want to believe that strength training matters. We want to believe that the weight room matters because we like the weight room. It goes back to it's not about what you like thing. Interestingly enough, this is a quote from one of Tony's articles. Strength coaches will tell you that great teams are made in the weight room. But remember, when you ask a barber if you need a haircut, he'll always say yes. I mean, if you ask a strength coach, is the weight room important? What's he going to say? Yes. Yeah, of course he is. Exactly. Yeah. Is my job important? Is what I do every day important? Is what I've attached myself to as a person important? Yes. But the reality is, it may be significantly less than yes. Tony Holler does not, not that he doesn't have his football players who run track lift, his track athletes who do not play football don't lift. And he literally had said to us, he was at our facility, he said, I don't care if my non-track guys ever pick up a weight. Which, again, in our room, I mean, it was literally heresy. People came up to me after the seminar and were like, did you hear what he said? Can you believe that he said? And I was kind of like, that's what he thinks. I don't necessarily agree with him, but I think it's interesting that he thinks it and that he's seeing the kind of results that he's seeing from doing the things that he's doing. And this is the most, when we start talking about velocity, horizontally at speeds of 10 meters per second. Strength training is primarily vertical and slow. Fast lifting is 2 meters a second, fast. So I think personally, like I've looked at a lot of the velocity-based stuff and I'm like, I don't even know if it's worth doing. When you're looking at like fast squatting or fast bench pressing or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's almost like in my mind, I wonder, are you better off just lifting heavy to get strong and not worrying about what's in the ground in the middle? Because I'm not sure what's in the ground in the middle is really valuable because, sorry, actually, well, I want to jump ahead. Sorry, because when I think about this.
Mike, what if, for the velocity-based training, what if the athlete was to implement as close to the bar?
I think that's different. But I think of velocity-based training as we currently would study it, it's like the West Side Dynamic Day kind of idea, or using Tendos, or using GymAwares, or whatever. And a lot of it to me, like when I think of velocity-based training, I think of trying to do things that were meant to be done slowly, fast. But when you do that, I feel like you're in that like mushy gray area of like, does that really have any value versus like plyos or sprinting or things that are meant to be done? Because this is the slide that I wanted. Look at this. Bar speeds of the bench press and squat were identified as speed strength 0.8 to 1 meters per second, strength speed 0.6 to 0.7, maximum strength 0.3 to 0.5 meters per second. That's really slow. Even when you're trying to do fast, like whatever, dynamic, bands, chains, whatever you're doing, you're going to probably get up around 1 meter a second, which means you're going to be 10% of what sprinting would be. That's not very fast. If you look at the fastest things that we could do, power snatch, we don't even get to 2 meters a second in the weight room. And this is why I said a guy like Tony thinks sprinting is such a powerful tool, because there's a massive difference between 10 meters per second and being in this type of situation where you're talking about less than 2 meters per second.
Mike, are you starting to rethink the clean then? Taking it out of your program?
No, and then we're going to get to that. That's a really good question. I will tell you why not in a minute, but I don't want to jump ahead too much. And this is what's this. So this was actually Derek Hansen, but benefits of sprint training: unilateral strength at really high movement speeds, unilateral power in horizontal and vertical directions, elastic power and stiffness at the hip and ankle complex, deceleration from very high speeds, which you're getting, injury reduction. Right? This was an article that Derek Hansen wrote. But you start to look at this stuff and think, there's a lot of really good stuff happening just from the act of sprinting, without ever worrying about a weight, right? And then this is Zach Deschamps. Speed develops the same CNS pathways as strength training in the weight room. Speed can build strength. Don't discount speed training as a means to get stronger. This is the kind of stuff that I think we completely have missed the boat on, right? So then you're thinking, okay, we should all listen to guys like Pat, listen to track coaches. And I'm like, not necessarily. I don't think we should listen to all track coaches. Because there's only one track coach that got me to realize this. I've listened to a lot of track coaches. I've watched a million, DVDs and VHS tapes and all kinds of stuff on speed development, and nobody said it the way that Tony said it. Because here is the problem, right? NFL coaches, Division I coaches, track coaches, when you get the highest responders in the world, you can have this kind of confounding variable type thing. Like, you can do all kinds of stuff and think that all of that is why you got the end result that you did. And more than likely, you're probably wrong. And it's the same idea we talk about, like the steroid thing. Again, if you go and you work in Division I football, one of the things you'll realize is you've got all athletically gifted mesomorphs, and no matter how bad your strength program is, those kids will get bigger and they'll get stronger. I learned a lot being, like, you work at BU in the 90s with 1 AA offensive lineman, you learn a lot about training people, because you don't have these, 1A responders. You get some like 1B or 1C, endomorphs who aren't responders. And they're going to respond really, really differently. But what happens for us is, too, like, strength coaches will just ignore track coaches completely and say, oh, they don't have to change direction. And so I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is think, if you find you find the Tony Halls of the world, you got to listen, in spite of the fact that it is just straight ahead. Like I used to always joke, right? Run fast, turn left. That's track. Okay, it's pretty easy. A lot less stuff to get involved in than most other sports. And if you're a real sprinter, just run straight ahead. Don't even worry about it. You don't even have to make a turn. You won't have to lean in at all. But I think you should listen to some of these good high school track coaches, guys like Tony and Rob Assisi. These are some of the guys, like, I'm reading stuff and thinking other people would be like, these guys are no names. They're nobodies. Like, why are you listening to these guys? And I'm like, I'm listening to these guys because they're in that, non-responder, moderate responder kind of category, and they're still getting crazy results. Those are guys that I find more interesting. Like I said, unusual results in unusual places. I look at a guy like Tony and think, he's a chemistry teacher. Ex-football coach, chemistry teacher, who's now a track coach. But I think the fastest, I think the kid's a sophomore now, but the fastest sophomore in the United States, Marcellus Moore, and this is, now think about it, he's in Chicago area, Illinois area, which is not conducive to track and field because you're inside for a vast majority of the time. So, and that's the same idea, with Chris Korfist, people who get average people faster. Korfist's business, I think, is called Slow Guy Speed School. So, and as I said, I've missed the boat on this for way too long. But what we understand, if we are in the strength and conditioning world, we all coach sprinters. All of our guys, Devin's guys, the best hockey players are the best sprinters. I don't care if you look at it. I mean, speed matters. You can't find a team sport where speed does not matter. It doesn't exist. And I don't think you can find a team sport where the fastest guy generally is not the most dominant player in the game, even if they're not the most skilled. So when you suddenly start looking at this and thinking, wait a second, we've got the ability to maybe drastically impact something that we weren't able to drastically impact before, then we need to change. What stopped us? What stopped us from sprinting? One, laziness. But the other was, I was worried about people getting hurt. Because what happens when you start running sprints, and let's say when you start running sprints wrong time, wrong amount, wrong whatever, people pull hamstrings, people pull groins, and then suddenly you're like, ooh, I don't know if we want to do this anymore. Because what do we do? We're like turtles. We go back into our shell, and it's like, okay, if I just stay where I'm comfortable in the weight room, nobody gets hurt on my time. I can send them someplace else to get hurt, and I don't have to be responsible for that anymore. So we've got to ask ourselves, like, why are we not doing it, right? Like I said, for me, lazy. So for me, do no harm scared us into, do no harm became do too little. Because I was thinking, hey, do no harm. That means like, okay, if we run 100%, we're running the risk of somebody getting hurt. That ended up, and you'll show you the stats, not being true. This is really interesting. So this is JB Moran. I was lucky enough to be able to present with him in Barcelona this year and meet him and actually talk to him. He's one of the leading researchers right now in the area of speed. If JB has a problem, I said he's way too smart. So it's like sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't really know exactly what he's talking about, which can make it difficult. But this article was unbelievable. Sprinting, a potential vaccine for hamstring injury. And what he basically is stating is that probably the best thing we can do to literally vaccinate our players against hamstring strain is to do regular sprinting. And the fact that we're not doing regular sprinting is probably part of the problem versus part of the solution. So the do no harm idea actually doesn't fit the bill. We want to almost be in the opposite vein. Because think about this, right? This is where we've been our whole career. Strength training versus sprint training, 2 hours versus 2 minutes usually. If you think about your typical college program, 2 hours in the weight room, maybe 2 minutes of sprints if you're lucky. And if you're some people, could be 2 hours and 0 minutes. None. Nobody's running a sprint. Oh, sorry. Because as Northerners, what do? We go inside for the winter, right? And we kind of use that. That's another great excuse. Just be in the weight room. I'm just going to get in the weight room, get big. Because we don't have space, right? So, if you're a football coach or whatever, you just go down south and you get kids that can run outside all year round because they tend to be faster. Seems logical. That's what most football programs kind of, go by that simplistic philosophy. So we basically use space as an excuse. I don't have the space to run sprints. Or, like I said, this was a Dan Paff quote, which I loved. You write a novel in the weight room and give me cliff notes when working on speed. I think that's what most of us are doing. So we've got to think about how do we want to allocate our time? How do we want to allocate our energy? In my mind, is it possible that we're wasting a lot of time in general in the weight room? I would say maybe. It's possible. I won't say yes, but said, have you ever spent a year chasing 5 pounds? I would say when I was a college football strength coach, I wasted huge amounts of time in the weight room. I'd have kids for 12 months who increased their bench press by 10 pounds. And I would look at that and think, okay, we did 12 months of training. That guy now benches 410 versus 400. That time could have been better used to do something else. And Devin just wrote a post on strengthcoach.com site the other day, talking about how little you have to do to maintain strength. And you almost get scared to think I could have this guy lifting probably 1 day a week doing, 2 or 3 singles and he could still do 390, or I could be crushing him 2 days a week and, cycling and doing all this periodization, all this stuff. And he goes from 400 to 410. And I wonder, I know that I wasted a lot of time chasing after a very, very small amount of strength. And that when you start to analyze the time invested, you're kind of like, I don't know if there was a great return on investment for the amount of time that I had my guys in the weight room. The other thing is we may overestimate the amount of strength that's needed. I think we clearly overestimate the amount of strength because we just feel like, again, because if you go back, I remember Eric Cressey one time saying strength is the glass. and everything else is what goes into the glass. But it's like, yes, up to a certain point, and you only need a certain, it's like, I'll give you my beer analogy. Like, you get a 16-ounce beer, it doesn't get warm, you can always get another one. You get a 23-ounce beer, you're kind of drinking it fast because it's getting warm. Like, bigger is not necessarily, a bigger glass isn't always going to be better, right? And so Kurt Hester, and this is another guy, I have all these like internet boyfriends that I've met. Kurt's another, he'll laugh when he sees this, but that he made it into the category of internet boyfriend. But people that you don't really know, but you do. And you think, like, if I saw this person on the street tomorrow, I might walk right by him. I might look at him and say, oh, I thought you'd be bigger. But it's, but he sent me this because we were talking about this the other day. He's at Louisiana Tech. And one of the things that he said, he actually did this. Brian Mann, who's one of the guys who's been really pushing the whole velocity-based idea, encouraged him to do this. And I think what he said, if I'm correct, is he said, take like your top 6 guys at every position and then take their best lifts. He said, that'll probably give you a pretty reasonable idea of what you think the necessary strength will be to play at that position. And like he said, these guys were like, all league guys that went on to play in the NFL. They were the top of his top. But the numbers are not, like, look at this, like, super impressive. Offensive line, 300 clean, 325 bench. Right? 500 squat, 285 clean, 295 bench. The point being, the numbers of these high achievers, the reason they tend to be high achievers is not based on weight room numbers. Great weight room numbers tend to be achieved by guys who are not great players, as a general footnote to history. And yes, there are exceptions. There are always exceptions. But in general, you'd probably find that your great player is probably a little more average in the weight room. So the only point of that being, if you get to a certain point, I always think when you hit the genetic ceiling, sometimes you can just be comfortable that, okay, I hit the genetic ceiling. This is where this guy, he tends to bob around in here. Like, I'll get guys that can bench press 300 pounds, and kind of no matter how hard we work, maybe we get them at 310, and then if we slack off a little bit, suddenly they're at 295, and you're like, you're at that genetic ceiling. They're not going to go significantly higher because, one of the things I've always said, if strength training worked the way that we want it to as strength and conditioning coaches, everybody would bench 400 pounds. Because you just keep programming better and boom, okay, progressive resistance, we're going to add more weight. It doesn't work that way. Why? Everybody in here, I could ask every single, at least male, sorry, my sexist nature is coming out here, and say, okay, what's your career best bench? And everybody would be like, blank, 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 right down the line. Everybody would know. And I'd be like, okay, if I gave you 3 weeks to train, could you do it? Probably yeah. If I gave you 6 weeks, could you do more? Probably no. Some guys be like, I've never done more than 250 ever. And that's the way that it is. It's just there is a certain point where you're probably getting into diminishing returns. So I guess what I'm saying is we need to be more realistic about what we're doing from a strength training programming standpoint. Because, we're not track coaches, we're not powerlifting coaches, we're not Olympic lifting coaches. Ultimately, none of this stuff will actually matter in terms of, the best players are going to be the best players. And yes, don't get me wrong. Am I saying you can't make people better? Do I want to push everybody to that genetic ceiling? Absolutely, positively. Do I still push my athletes to get stronger? Absolutely, positively. But do I also want to realize that at some point I may be spinning my wheels in the mud? Absolutely, positively. If you're in high school, you're never going to have to worry about this. That's the good thing. But if you're in college, you will have to worry about it, because in college, it is not uncommon to have that guy in his junior year and you've got coaches pushing you. We need him to get stronger. We need him to get stronger. We need him to get bigger. And you're like, I've looked at coaches sometimes and said, I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not really sure that this guy's going to get, like, this might be, what we see might be what we get, plus or minus 10 pounds. Because people, I love this one, just get stronger, pick up heavy shit. It's like, it's not really that easy. I wish it was. It would be like our field, our job would be way easier if it was in fact that easy. If it was just a matter, just show up, keep lifting, and you'll get stronger. Life would be great. But it's not. It's not as easy as we would like it to be. But this is the more important part. And this was JB again, but he was on the Just Fly podcast. And I literally paused this so that I could write the quote down. He said, at some point, the level of strength is enough. and you have to go and do something else. And this point might be earlier than we think. It's an interesting premise. You start looking at it and thinking, at some point, the level of strength might be enough. And, it might be sooner than we think it is. All I want you to do is think about that. You all got to come to your own conclusions, right? That's, in my mind, that's velocity-based training. You want to do velocity-based training? Okay, let's move 10 meters a second. Let's not move 2. And we talked about that. And so some people, what this is going to necessitate, this is the thought process standpoint. You may have to redesign your weight room. That's actually not our old BU weight room, although it's the exact same Samson racks. I couldn't find an old BU picture. I don't know why that had the racks in it. It's amazing, all the pictures I have, but I don't have one like that. That was a kid who set up the weight room the exact same way as we did at BU, and with the exact same Samson racks. So it looks a lot like the original BU weight room, but it's not. But the point being, and this is what, what a lot of people are going to say, right? But I don't have a lot of space, right? I see some people giggling, exactly. As long as you get it, that's okay. I just, I don't want to feel like I wasted my time pulling up the wine slide, But like what we had to do when we started thinking about this, like, wait a second, we got to reorganize the floor. We got to figure out a way to run sprints the way we want to run sprints. Sprints are now a priority, which means we might have to take some stuff out. When I first, actually, I don't want to show Devin's yet. When I first designed the weight room at BU, the one that we moved into in '97, I put 4 lanes of track surface in there. And I will say clearly, this was an original thought. I was the first person to ever do that. Because every single person that walked in the weight room, they looked at all this empty space, they went around like this, they were like, what are you going to put here? And I was like, people. We're going to put a lot of people here. We're going to do all kinds of different stuff. We're going to run sprints. We're going to do plyos. We're going to do all kinds of things in this space that does not have any weights in it, in our weight room. I would go back to you right now and say, if I'm thinking about weight rooms, that would be my number one priority. I want to do real velocity-based training, and if I can't find a hallway, or I can't get outside, or I can't do something, I got to make enough space like this. So Devin sent me this clip. How big's your room, Devin?
3,000.
Yeah.
20 yards long.
3,000 square feet. And this, one of the things I love about Devin, I'll be very honest, is that smart enough to cheat. We started talking about this and he was like, yep, that's a good idea. We're doing that. And so what does he do? He figures out, okay, how can I get this done in my 3,000 square foot weight room? I would say you barely have enough room to do that, right?
They're almost running into the wall.
Yeah, exactly. They're running into the wall. And now I don't have do I have no, I don't have the hallway clip. I forget. I don't know what I did with that. But he's got another one where they were doing flying tens in the hallway in the rink. But the idea is, when you know it's a good idea, you have to come up with a way to implement the good idea. You can't be in a situation where you think, I can't do that. I don't care if it was me and I had a small weight room, I'd do 5-yard flies. You know what I mean? Or 5-yard sprints. I wouldn't care. Like I would still, because even in 5 yards, you're probably going to get to 8 meters a second. You'll probably still get to 4 times the fastest thing you're going to do in the weight room. And now when you talk about a 5-yard sprint, it's literally 15 feet. But I'd set up my timer and I'd sprint 15 feet if that was all I had. I'd also sprint, 7.5 yards. Because the thing that you have to think about is it doesn't matter. As long as you do it and you record it and you rank it and you publish it and you can reproduce it, it doesn't make any difference. You don't need your data to compare to anybody else's data. Like it's interesting, and I noticed Devin's guys were hand starting. We foot start. We don't, and we'll talk about this when we go in the weight room, but I spent, in the combine, you have to put your hand on the ground. So we spent a massive amount of time teaching people how to 3-point start. But then I used to time my BU guys, and they never go into the combine. But we'd always 3-point start. And I just get we'd spend so much time trying to teach this guy how to start. And we'd have like the frog stance. You'd look at all these things, you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. And I'm spinning my wheels now for an hour, trying to teach this guy, to get his weight on his front foot and where his back leg's going to go. Now we just line up and run from a standing start. Again, if I'm a football strength coach, the people that have to put their hand on the ground will put their hand on the ground. Kids that are juniors and seniors are going to have to get timed by pro scouts. They're going to learn to put their hand on the ground. But otherwise, initially, I'd probably, receivers, I'd want to know how fast can they run from a standing start, because that's ultimately what's going to matter. When we talk about speed, drills are cute and great for warm-ups. I think this has been another, if you think about track, huge amounts of time gets wasted. Like, you won't get fast doing like boom, 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 running around with a bag over your head or a stick or whatever. Like, that's all great stuff, great warm-up stuff. That's not going to get you faster. What's going to get you faster is the physical act of running fast. If you said, we do all the right drills and we don't sprint, which is kind of what we were doing, to be honest, then what you'll get is these sort of lukewarm, mediocre sort of results. And instead, if you just go out and say, okay, here's A, here's B, there's the timer, run as fast as you can. And I don't think you'll get fast by lifting weights. I do agree with that part. I'm not necessarily sure. I think you might get a higher vertical jump from lifting weights more than you will get fast from lifting weights, because when we start thinking about angles and vectors, it probably is not as big a contributor as we would like it to be. Because if it was, we would have seen more like 4.3s and 4.4s than we did, and we weren't. We saw more 40-inch verticals than we saw 4.3 40s. But when you think about that, that's perfectly logical, because we trained much more for 40-inch verticals than we did for 4.3 40s. So, but I think we need to understand too, lifting weights has a purpose. Lifting weights is going to be a piece of the speed development puzzle. I don't think, it's not like stronger legs are going to be a detriment to your speed, but I don't think they're as big a piece of the puzzle as we might have thought they were at one point, right? So, if you want to get fast, you have to run fast. It is unavoidable. No matter what else you do, if you do not run fast, you will not get faster, right? And I said, we all talk like we understand the idea. We all talk specificity of training. We all understand specificity of training, right? Except we don't. Because if we really understood specificity of training, this would have been readily obvious to all of us. And I know it wasn't readily obvious to me. And if you're going to look at me and think, oh yeah, we've been doing time 10-yard dashes for the last 10 years, and I'm going to be like, wow, you were 10 years ahead of me, and I wish you'd done this talk sooner. So I would have been able to see it. Because it's just, I think we like to be in the weight room. It's safe. But it's not where the answer lies. This is the old Wayne study. This guy, it's really interesting. This guy came, I don't know if you remember Lip, but he came to Burlington when we had the high-speed treadmills. He was yeah. And again, talk about missing the boat. I didn't even know who he was, right? This guy ends up being the leading speed researcher. The guy that had inspired J.B. Marin and Clark and all these other guys is Peter Wayne. And at that time, he was at Harvard and at the Natick Army Labs, and he came and talked to us. And I just remember him saying, but here's the problem. Faster top running speeds are achieved with greater ground reaction force, not more rapid leg movements. That means strength matters. Yes, and strength matters more than turnover matters. Yes, I will agree with that part. And as I said, I could stop it right here, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna beat this horse to death, right? Because this was the thing that for me, so the Charlie Francis idea, right? Guy on the right, Carl Lewis, lankier, right? Not viewed as a big weight room guy. If you talked about people in the sort of track and field lore, you'd be like, yeah, well, Lewis wasn't a big weight room guy. Guy on the left, Ben Johnson, banned for life for steroids, huge weight room guy. Like, you read Charlie Francis' training system, all his numbers are in there. He could bench 365, he could squat 600, whatever it was. Like, he was a big weight room guy. But the interesting thing about these two guys is what? Same speed, exactly, same speed. They ran almost identical times. And then you look and think, so here's the thing, right? What's the common denominator? Sprints. What did they both do? They both ran sprints. They both ran a lot of 100-meter dashes. And one guy was a weight room rat, banned for life for steroids, loved the gym. And the other guy was a guy who people said didn't really like to lift weights and was lankier and whatever. Didn't matter. They both ran sprints a lot, and they both became the two fastest men in the world. With approaches that, maybe diametrically opposed would be too hyperbolic, but with two approaches that were pretty dissimilar. How many people have ever seen Usain Bolt training clips, weight room clips? Terrible, right? Awful. Leg press, leg extension, like you look and think, I would look at that and think, how can that guy get fast? His weight room program stinks, right? Or you could look at it and think, I need to get a leg press and I need to get a leg extension because he's the fastest man in the world, right? Or you could go to step 3. We need to run more sprints because he's the fastest man in the world and he's on this horrific strength training program. Because what you realize, and that's, I guess, my point, is that although strength training may matter, it does not seem to matter as much as sprinting matters. That's the differentiator when we start looking at, like when we're saying, okay, what's the common denominator? The common denominator is the act of running fast.
So would you say it's safe to say that strength training, the functional benefit of strength training is to reach a threshold of strength to body weight ratio, a functional strength to body weight ratio?
Probably, yes. And probably, I think there's lots of benefits. I think there's injury prevention benefits. I think for most sports, there's like armor building, as Dan John would like to say, benefits, in terms of, in general, in most sports, you're going to do better with a little more meat on you. So I think we could look at significant numbers of things that would consider to be beneficial. I just don't know if necessarily looking at it and saying that there's a really strong correlation to speed. Because evidentially, there isn't a really strong correlation to speed. Like, it's interesting, I got to hang out with Michael Johnson's coach, this guy Clyde Hart, who's, I think he's 85 now, something, 87, he's really old. And he's a really cool guy. But, one of the things that he said was, he said, he goes, it's always fun to watch the Olympics and to hear a high jumper and a marathoner tell you that the fastest man in the world runs wrong. And I was like, because I remember watching Michael Johnson win, and they were like, it was Dwight Stones and somebody else. He leans back too much. And you're like, he just won the freaking 400 meters in the Olympics. He doesn't lean back too much. The other guys don't lean back far enough, apparently, because they all lost to him. But it's just, you look, and sometimes you got to look and think, I don't know if that's, there's something else that's out there that we're missing. And what I believe we're missing is we don't run fast. And we don't do it often enough. Because look at this. This is crazy. Number of steps, 46.2 steps, 43.6 steps. Frequency of steps, 3.7 per second, 3.9 per second. Average length of steps, 2.16 meters, 2.19 meters. Fastest 10-meter segment, 0.83 seconds, 0.83 seconds. Exact, their fastest 10-meter segment. And that's for these guys, I want to say that's like 60 to 70 is their fastest 10-meter segment. So these guys don't even hit top speed till almost 60 meters. But the point is, at 60 meters, they're moving at almost identical speeds. And that's right out of the Charlie Francis Training System book, right? But like we said, even like Mia, so Mia's 14 years old, and she's fast. She's like a 1.5 flat 10. But that's closer to 8 meters a second than 10. But that's still, when we think about weight room, that's still 4 times better, 5 times better than what your best Olympic lifter is going to do. But like I said, and look at what did we do, right? We created a lane. All these are cones, construction barriers. We went to literally like a construction catalog and ordered these construction barriers so we could set up a lane so we don't have people running into each other, and we lay the cones out and we put the timers out and we run. It's so incredibly non-complicated, right? The Holy Grail.
Like, is she falling into that or just ripping, like, standstill?
Well, it's interesting. So she's standing start. So if you can imagine, and we'll show you when we get in the weight room, that little blue blip that you see right there is the start block. So she can do whatever she wants prior to start. It's a foot start, and it starts when her front foot moves away from the block. And some people say, well, it's going to be different because she's going to get a step. The good thing about this is it doesn't matter because everyone's going to do the exact same thing. And when we rank and publish, it's always an apples to apples comparison. And that's all that really matters, is that we've got an apples to apples comparison. But so I don't care. Like, someone could say, I want to rock back and go, good, go ahead. Do a handstand. Do a forward roll. I don't care what you want to do. All I want you to do is try to beat your old time. Because ultimately, the cool thing about this is it is all strictly internally competitive. Everybody knows what their best time is, and it's really fun to watch the kids. So, we're trapped for space too at our Woburn facility. So we had them starting against the wall. We moved, like, we wanted to do 5-yard flies. So basically now we're having them start here, And now we've got the photocell up here at the 15-foot mark, right? But what kids were literally doing is they were like starting to like put their foot against the wall. Like it's crazy to see because then some people, when you think about motor learning, will talk about this idea of self-organization. And these people start self-organizing, like, okay, I'm going to try to figure out what the fastest way to do this might actually be. So like you said, you know, if someone was like, I'm going to rock back and forth and go, great. I'm going to really get all my weight on my front foot and push as hard as I can, great. Try it a bunch of different ways. But every time you try it, you get a piece of data. And that piece of data says, oh, that worked better. Or that piece of data said that didn't work as well. Like, well, people all the time, can I try my right foot? Can I switch it over the other side? Can I put right foot first? Can I do left foot first? Can I do this? Can I do that? I'm like, do whatever you want. Because ultimately, all I'm trying to do is elicit that 100% number. I don't really care what else happens except, because think about, imagine, this is what I was talking about. Imagine if you could go in the weight room every day and say, I want to max 6 times today. I want 600% efforts in X lift, whatever it is. It'd be a mess. Because the bad part about, 100% effort in the weight room, when it doesn't work, it's a mess. It's spotters and maybe injuries and like there's all kinds of stuff that goes with 100% effort in the weight room. The cool thing about this, there's literally no downside. None. So this is really interesting. So this is my son. Now this is, like I said, n equals 1, right? Now he was, look at, first time, January 2018, 1.87. That's like sundial. At 1.87, I mean, it's slow and painful to watch. And he knew it was slow and painful to watch. He was like, Dad, I'm so slow. I'm like, yes, and the only way you'll get faster is by trying to run faster. In literally 12 months, 0.4 seconds. Those of you who have trained football players, I mean, that's like a 0.7 change in your 40-yard dash in a year. And yes, maturation, God, testosterone, height difference, lots of variables thrown in there, lots of confounding variables. But the reality is 0.4 seconds is massive, like massive and undeniable in terms of the value of just doing something simple. And I used to always laugh. Steve's kids were like that. Because Steve's kids would always come and train with us when we did the combine stuff. And Steve's kids in high school could beat most of the best college players in New England routinely in a 10-yard dash. You know why? Because they ran a lot of 10-yard dashes. I mean, and genetically, were they wired to be fast? Probably not. I mean, Craig, fast twitch, but I wouldn't look at Craig and think like super fast twitch guy, but he would literally go and like stomp on, these Northeastern running backs and BC defense backs and all these guys. He'd beat them all, and they'd just look and be like this cannot be possible that this kid is beating us by like, 0.03, 0.04, 0.05 every single time we're doing it. But he had the advantage, and he ended up, like if you look at Steve's son, he went a long way. He ended up playing in Major League Lacrosse, which he would have said, I would say he probably got further than his genetics would have predicted that he was going to go. He went to Colby initially, so he started out at Division III, and he still ended up in Major League Lacrosse. So, I mean, but look at what these kids do. What are they doing? They're all standing in line waiting to sprint.
Did your son stand out in lacrosse this year?
Oh, light years different. Like it's crazy in terms of, he looks like, we have one kid who can really run. And last year, like he and Mark, it was literally like, okay, you're not even in the same conversation as this kid. And now last night watching him play, I looked for a second to see who it was. And it was actually Mark. And I was like, oh my God, look at the difference. I mean, it's a significant difference. And I know, like I said, because, I've been plotting the data points just out of curiosity more than anything. But it's right there in front of you. So this is the most important part, biggest point today, at least from those of you who are going to worry about speed development. 2 to 3 reps, 2 to 3 times a week. That's it. No more. No races. Interesting, like Pat's laughing, right? Tony's a smart guy. Now you say, why no races? Because one, I want them competing against themselves. So I don't want you worried about, can I beat Dave? No, I don't want to worry about that. What I want to worry about is, can I beat 1:51? That's my best time. Can I run 1:5 flat? Because the other thing that happens is when you insert another person, again, talk about confounding variables. Now you're going to elicit maybe a different competitive response, a different kind of sympathetic state, whatever it is. where somebody's now exerting, and all of a sudden, you think the races, a lot of times we see people pull hamstrings. So there's never two people going at the same time. It's one guy always goes, and the only thing that guy's worried about is what his best time is or her best time is, right? Charlie Francis rule, get a PR and you're done. Charlie Francis that's in the book. Like, if you got a PR, the workout was over, take it in. That's really hard to do. It's hard. Like, some kids will love it. Some kids will really like celebrate and like, okay, I'm good. Fastest time ever, I'm out. Most kids will want to go again. So it's tougher to enforce, but I would, if you could, be like, okay, that's a PR, screw. Get out of here. Go lift. Go do whatever you got to do next, right? For us, and this is what I'm talking about, it being safe, I figured this out. We did about 2,000 to 3,000 sprints a week last summer, which means we did somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 10 or flying 10 reps. We had 0 sprint-related injuries that I know of. No one reported a hamstring or groin strain to me. So when you start thinking about like J.B. Marin's idea, sprinting as a vaccine, seems that way. When you think about like the do no harm thing, I used to be afraid. Like, I think the research, and again, I'm always not a huge research guy, but I always like to kind of go back to it. The research tells us that when you start to go over 20 yards or 20 meters, the incidence of injury goes up. So that's why I always discourage people. I'm like, don't worry about 40s. But yet, if you look at Tony Holler does 240s twice a week, and he gets a flying 10 time in his 30 to 40 segment on every kid. Like, that's his electronic time. He handheld timed the 40, and he uses his electronic timer to get the 30 to 40 segment, so he gets their highest speed segment at the end. And he still says he has no problems. But I haven't got that daring yet. There's still a little bit of do no harm in me where I think, I don't know if I really want to do that. Okay. Want to get players hurt? And this, for those of you that work with football, it's funny, I had two of my friends were coaching at an Ivy League school that will go unnamed, but they were saying, yeah, we've had huge problem with hamstrings. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you what you're doing, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I said, are you guys still lining guys up at the end of practice, pairing them up and having them race at the end of practice? He's like, yeah, coach loves it. Like, is that where all the hamstring pulls come? He's like, yeah, all the time. Said, yeah, if you told me to design a way to get somebody hurt, I would say, let's get them tired in practice. Then let's pair them up at the end of practice. Let's put a huge amount of pressure on them, like winner sits out or something like that, where we're really going to get that, sympathetic nervous system jacked up, and then have them do it. Said, I can almost guarantee you probably like a 1 out of 30, 1 out of 20 incidents of injury. And he's like, yeah, that's pretty much what we do twice a week at the end of practice. I was like, well, that's why guys get hurt. I said, just switch it. Put it at the 10-minute mark. If you want to do it 10-minute mark, bring your timer out, and don't let anybody compete with anybody else. And coaches hate that. Hey, don't let anybody compete. It's like, don't let anybody compete. They can compete with themselves. We want to get guys faster. That's the goal. So just think about that, right? So don't be scared, be smart. I was scared. Scared made me too conservative. Scared made me not do things that were going to be really high value for a really long time because I was worried about people pulling muscles. But realize that injuries are going to increase when you go past 20. So in our situation, and Steve, we were talking about this actually Tuesday at our staff meeting. So what we do 10s for 3 weeks. Same thing you just saw me doing, foot start, 10 yards, that's all you're running, 0 to 10. The next 3 weeks, we go 5-yard fly. So 5-yard fly basically means the timer's now set up 5 yards away from you. And you have to be strict about the starting line. You got to have a starting line because 4 yards matters and 6 yards matters. Like, every additional bit of fly in that you give them lowers the time. Like, the time drops about 1/10 every 5 yards. So, if we have someone run a 1.5 and we give them a 5-yard fly, they're going to run a 1.4. If we give that guy a 10-yard fly, they're going to run in the 1.3s. Because what we're measuring at that point in time now, we're actually measuring top speed. But we're gradually increasing that fly-in distance over the course of the summer. And what are we doing? We're gradually increasing the amount of distance that they're sprinting for, which to me makes pretty good sense. And like I said, Northeast reality is that, you may have to modify that in different ways. You may have to be like, okay, whatever, 2, 3, 4-yard flies. But, however, whatever you got to do to make it work is what works. Like, there is no like, you know, I don't know if I could do it in here in this room, but, you know, in most decent sized rooms, you could probably get a 5-yard sprint, you know, with a crash pad up against the wall. Our guys, I should have filmed my son's friends the other day. We're literally trying to, like, we put a mat against the wall so when they run, they have a mat to slow down in. And they were trying to spider themselves. So they were like literally throwing themselves as hard as they could into the mat. But the interesting thing, the kid who threw himself hardest into the mat ran the fastest time. Because his focus was on, I'm going to slam that wall as hard as I possibly can into the mat. And he ran the fastest time anybody ran that day. And then I told everyone else, I was like, try to hit the mat harder. And they did. And a couple other kids actually got faster times. So it's fun to play with. So a couple things we're going to show you. So acceleration ladder, right? And this is where we talk about where things have gone. Randy Smith, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he was really the predecessor of Perform Better, probably in the 80s. He was the first guy who came up with this idea that I can sell speed equipment. He had a company called Speed City, and he sold bungee cords and hurdles, a lot of the similar stuff to what Perform Better is doing now. But one of the things he sold was what was called an acceleration ladder. And I think an acceleration, well, I'll actually show you. So this is what people call, you know, speed ladder, agility ladder, whatever it is. This is not what we're talking about. Right? The great Ken Whittier right here demoing for us. But the only reason I threw this in here is because it's amazing how often people will say stuff like, oh, ladders don't make you faster. Ladders don't make you faster. And we've never told anybody that ladders do make you faster. As an aside, I don't think that makes ladders a bad thing. I like ladders. I like them for coordination. I like them for lateral plyometric work. I like them for a lot of things, but I would never look at anybody and say, you know, if you do drills in the ladder, you're going to get faster, because I don't think that will happen. If you watch Lord of the Dance, Michael Flatley has really fast feet. I don't know what his 40 time is, right? There's not necessarily a correlation between your ability to chop your feet around and your ability to create force. But, oh, sorry, this should have been, I apologize, this should have been a couple sooner. And this has nothing to do with the ladder idea, but I'm going to go back a step. This is when we had Ken Clarkin, who's another one of these guys. So if you think about the guys you should be listening to, Matt Cross, JB Marin, Ken Clark, if you're interested in speed, these are guys whose stuff you want to look at. Cam Joss, who I haven't mentioned, but Cam's stuff will come in later. Cam's done a really good job. He's a young strength coach who's done a really good job of interpreting some of this stuff. But Ken made a really good point. I was very lucky. Another guy I met over the internet. And when I met him over the internet, he said, oh, I'm going to come to Boston. I said, well, would you speak at our staff meeting? And he was like, I'd love to. And he came in and he crushed like a 2-hour speed talk for us. But the most important slide is this one. The reason you're looking at the flying 10 time is because the flying 10 time is really that max velocity component. And the max, this is one of the things that Tony Holler kept hammering on, is max velocity is what really matters, because max velocity is like, you know, max bench press or max squat or max clean. The guy with the highest max is going to be the person who has the greatest capability to deal with a percentage of that max. You know, the simplest idea is if you said, you know, we're going to do a 225 bench test and I'm going to give you 2 guys to bet on. One bench is 300, one bench is 400. Who are you betting on? Everybody's betting on the guy that benches 400, thinking he'll do more reps at 225, and he will. You know, the 300 guy will get 10, the 400 guy will get 20, give or take. It's the same thing with max speed. When you look at these velocities, like when that max speed is higher, or max velocity actually is higher, that person then, you know, their 90% is higher. So the number that we really want to drop ultimately is that 10-yard fly number at the longest fly-in distance that we're comfortable with. Right now, personally, the longest distance I'm comfortable with is 15 yards. So we're effectively running 25. And I said to Steve the other day in the meeting, let's run 25 this summer with, you know, 2,000 times and see what happens. And if we run 25 this summer, 2,000 times, and nobody pulls a hamstring, maybe next summer we'll try a 20-meter run-up or a 20-yard run-up. So this is interesting. This is the real speed ladder. So this is one of my pictures, Craig Breslow. What you notice about this ladder is that the rungs, and we're going to have a couple of these today when we go into the weight room, these rungs are spaced out by 6 inches. So the only reason I put this up is this ladder has nothing to do with the previous ladder that we talked about. And I think, but this is where the confusion came with when people said, oh, speed ladders and ladders don't make you faster. I do think this ladder will help you to get faster. Because if you've ever written or read any of the Altus stuff, any of Stuart McMillan stuff, he always talks about the idea of rhythm, rise, projection, right? There's a rhythm to sprinting. There's a rise factor in terms of angle to upright, and there is the ability to project your center of gravity forward. These speed ladders teach that. It's amazing. The interesting thing about this, I asked Chris to get me one, and they got me this one, and they sent it up to me, and I just kind of threw it out. And Brez was the first guy I had to do it. And so I just said, okay, and for him, like, we're running out of the third rung because the first two rungs are kind of short. So I said, just get yourself in the third rung and just think, lean, fall, run, don't step on the rungs. That's the drill. And I had some other people standing there watching with me, and I was looking, and I was like, okay, tell me if I'm crazy or not. Is he running better than he was before? And everybody was like, yes, he's running much better than he was before. Because what these things are doing is, particularly when you get, like, again, baseball, major league pitcher, how much does he run? Very little. And if he does run, it's like out in the outfield, very sort of set cadence. He doesn't think about what his acceleration pattern might be. He doesn't think about this idea of rhythm or rise or projecting his center of gravity forward. But when you put him in this ladder, he does have to think about that stuff. He's got to think about the fact that each step is getting progressively longer and that he's got to push the ground harder. So these end up being, for us, this is the warm-up. So the last thing, we do, like, all the drills, all our drills are our warm-up. Then after drills, we're going to run some ladder sprints, somewhere 4 to 6 of these, and then they're just going to go over and do 2 or 3 10s. From what we do from like a speed power standpoint, it's probably added, if I was going to guesstimate, 2 minutes, maybe, Dan, Kevin, to what we do. Like, honestly, like, it's a 2-minute difference in terms of time allocation, if that. But the difference has been really substantial. So to summarize just this part, you got to get a really good warm-up in. Only 2 to 3 sprints, no more. More is not going to be better. Start with foot start 10s. And then progress from 5-yard fly to 10-yard fly to 15-yard fly. Record all the times. Be really accurate about your record keeping. Be really accurate about your measurements. Because what you'll realize is this gets really competitive. And if you screw it up, like, it's funny, sometimes we'll have kids run a PR and I'm like, somebody get a tape measure, because we don't have the advantage of having yard lines, in our weight room. So, and every once in a while we'll measure out and I'm like, no wonder it was fast. Someone's got it at 29 feet. Someone was not as attentive to the details as they needed to be. So you got to, not being on your game when you do this, like little things, like the other day we ran and they ended up having a 6-yard or a 4-yard fly instead of a 5. And everybody was slower. And it was like, I don't understand why I'm slower. And then I looked and I thought, well, it's because you're starting in the wrong place. And when we literally moved it back 3 feet, boom, everybody's times were exactly where they should have been. And we probably average, I would say we average 1 or 2 personal bests a day. Some kids, but I should have actually taken a picture. I just have it all written on the front of there. I got it all on the file, and I just have literally been writing them on the front of the file. But it's crazy to look at sort of the aggregation of the data, and Devin's nodding his head, but it's like, it's amazingly consistent, right? Like ridiculous in terms of, you'll have somebody like I'll look at Mark's times and it'll be like, 149, 148, 150, 151, like they're within, 0.02 can very, very consistently. So that's one of the things I love about the Brower. So it's, in season, though, say like I'm in your situation, I'm talking about, Premier League soccer, Series A soccer or whatever, Bundesliga. I'd probably go off my GPS data and say, okay, who topped out, did this guy get 90%? If he got 90 to 95, then I'd probably exempt him. So, I'd probably have my data guy pulling these guys out and saying, okay, we had 7 guys in this game who twice hit, 92 to 97 or something like that. They're not going to sprint the next day that we do it. And then I'd sprint everybody else. So yeah, I think the management is more difficult in season. But, again, I think that's why, if you start really slow, or not start slow, start short with the 10s. We've seen it. It's been pretty much foolproof. We have not, honestly, we haven't had one hiccup. And we did. I mean, and I'm not, when I say 30,000, I'm not kidding. I mean, that's our data. So this continues. The reason I want to continue into the posterior chain stuff is because we got to talk about vectors and strength a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about some more Charlie Francis ideas, a little bit about sled, and that's why this all kind of ties in before we actually spend a few minutes. I gotta pick up my pace here because I still want to talk a little bit about the squat deadlift thing too, but a little bit about bridging, a little bit about whatever, Nordics.
Real quick, you had said, maybe the personal trainers wouldn't be interested, but listening to Ken Clark on, Body by Boyle Online, the in-service he did for you, I actually have him on the podcast this week. He was saying that max velocity training is the greatest stimulus from a rate of force application that you can get. And you're talking about sprinting being a vaccine for injuries. Are you thinking of possible adult population? Not adult.
It's interesting, and probably the same reason. I'm thinking about it, and I'm scared. I have that concern of how many Achilles tendons am I going to pop if I do this? Will it be 0? Will it be 1? Will it be 10? And that's what keeps me literally, I'm like this. I'm leaning in and thinking that's a really good, I don't know if that's a really good idea. But I think the difference is, again, for those tempo running at all, anything that even closely approximates sprinting still probably ends up meeting this need in terms of if we got somebody to run 5 meters a second, half the speed that these kids are running, we're still giving them a really beneficial stimulus. So I think for our adult clients, just the act of running alone, we don't necessarily have to time, we don't have to sprint, but we're going to give them something that can be 2 to 3 times higher than what we think. And it's that interesting. I always talk about this, but it's interesting. I mean, sprinters always look good, right? I mean, you never go to a track meet and look at a sprinter and be like, oh, that's a really dumpy sprinter, right? Never, ever. You've never been at a track meet and seen someone and been like, oh yeah, that sprinter doesn't look like a thoroughbred racehorse. No, never. Same thing with jumpers. So I'm a little bit but you're right. I do think that there is some value to, hey, even tempos, run down, run back, get moving, get into hip extension. Because again, even for the adults, just getting into hip extension, get out of the slog pattern, that they think is beneficial to them and think, okay, I need to push, I need to get my hip into extension. So you're right. There's probably
Coaching too, I would figure.
Right. More than you think. It's really interesting to see the deterioration of the running pattern in the average 40-year-old adult. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yes, that's a good point, Ant. So with this said, and Anthony's going to get to programming, maybe briefly, but so 2 big things that we changed as a result of where we're going right now from a programming standpoint in the weight room. 1, we moved our explosive stuff to our upper body day. Our explosive stuff was always being done on our lower body day, and we always years ago, we talked about this idea of CNS intensive training, and we wanted to try to keep all our CNS intensive stuff on the same day. But from a posterior chain standpoint, and you'll see when we start talking about it, there's basically become too many categories of lower body exercises that we want to do, that it necessitated the idea that, okay, we're going to have to move, say, clean or a trap bar jump or, snatch or whatever it is. We're going to move that to the upper body day, mainly just to balance the 2 days out. So for us, and we're talking about our 4-day summer program, but when we have our 4-day summer program, we need to create a little more balance in the number of things we're doing in one day. And we need to be able to get more. And you'll see when we get to there's more posterior chain stuff that I want to do that I can't do because that first, that day 1, day 3 kind of workout ends up being, a mile long and takes too long to do. The other thing that we've done, and this goes back to the idea of horizontal versus vertical, and I don't know this was another one of these things that, geez, it took me a while. We used to do sled work a lot, and people would always be like, well, what are you doing it for? And I was kind of like the Life cereal commercial, some stuff it's supposed to be good for you. But you kind of looked at it and thought, I don't know exactly why we do it, but we do it. After re-examining a lot of this stuff, I started to look at this and think, no, we need to be more horizontal, and sled push needs to be a strength exercise. Because again, we push sleds and people are like, how much weight? Whatever's on there, don't worry about it. Just, do a couple sets of 20, 10 with each leg. And it was just random waste of time probably, to be truthful. Then this summer, we put it in as a strength exercise, this past summer. And on phase, we're going to do it now, like day 1 and day 3, phase 1 and phase, or actually day 1 really, in phase 1 and phase 2, sled push will be treated as a strength exercise. And this is what I was talking about, Charlie's stuff. So, and this is actually Jack Eichel, but just to give you an idea, so Jack was number 2 overall pick in, I don't know, 2015 maybe? And I forget what that, I think that's 740 pounds. I think, pretty sure. Either 680 or 740. But, you know, the idea here, but because, well, I'll just let this play out and then I'll show you. Obviously, if we're thinking about strength training, what do we have? We have something that looks approximately like a horizontal leg press, right? That's from Charlie Francis's book. You know what that is? That's a horizontal leg press. That's an old Universal Gym machine where he was literally, so if you can imagine, this was the leg press sitting, this was the dip bar, and what he had his guys doing was pivoting themselves around, holding onto the dip bar and pushing the leg press out because Charlie was that's why I said you got to read the book again. When you see the level of innovation that was in that book in 1984 or whenever it was written, it's uncanny, the stuff that he was saying. But I started looking at this. I remember thinking about this. We looked at equipment. We looked at the thing called the butt blaster. We were trying to figure out how do we get this. But then what I realized, that's the sled. The only difference with the sled is the sled's moving. Instead of the weight stack being stationary and going up and down, we're just moving the sled forward. So suddenly we started to say, okay, sled is now a strength exercise. It's not some stuff's supposed to be good for you. Don't know how much weight you're supposed to use. Don't really know what's supposed to be happening. And then when Ken Clark came in, we're going to be much crisper, and it's going to be a sled march. And you'll see that. All right, so I got to write. So hold on. Because I got to think of the things that I want to make sure we do. Muscle stiffness demo. Sled march. And we get in the weight room so that we can make sure. Because what we ended up doing, we was doing it as a strength exercise, and I said it became like a sled slog, where it was just a matter of like, okay, how much, like kids were, their shoes were coming off, and it was literally like, how much weight can I get on the sled, and can I make this thing move? We had like, I said we used to have like moonwalk sled, where the kid would literally, he'd be like, as he pushed forward, he went backwards. So he was actually only gaining about half the distance that he pushed because the sled, just, you know, but what we did is we let a good idea become a bad idea. We're going to show you how to not have that happen. The other way to not have it happen is to only do it 2 phases. Phase 1, 10 reps each leg, just like we would do if it was a strength exercise or, you know, whatever, an anatomical adaptation exercise. Phase 2, 5 reps each leg, more load. Phase 3, change, and here's phase 3. Sled sprint. Because this is the other thing when you get into like, you know, Marin's work and Matt Cross's work and all this stuff, resisted sled sprinting. This is another area where we've had a huge like, ooh, we missed the boat. Because what do we want to be able to do? We want to, again, be able to produce that horizontal force. How are we going to get better at that? Well, same way we would approach it in the weight room, right? And this is the J.B. Marin idea. We may have to do something and it might be something different. And that's something different, right? I think sled sprinting is like horizontal Olympic lifting. Look at it that way and then see if it has more value to you when you start looking at it and thinking, okay, wait a second. You know, I'm trying to teach somebody how to be really explosive horizontally. And we're just going to take what we've learned, what we've done from the sled pushing, and now we're going to apply that same pushing concept into sled sprinting. So the problem with sled sprinting is figuring out, okay, what do we do? How do we do it? They used to say things like 10% rule. And the 10% rule was 2 different things, actually. It was a weight that slows you down by 10%, or it was 10% of your body weight. Both are wrong. So don't worry about either one. But when people say, you know, oh yeah, you want to, you know, worry about your 10%, like 10% makes no sense because heavier guys get more weight. That doesn't make any sense. Heavier guys tend to have a poorer strength to body weight ratio. They need less weight. So basically, the lighter you are, the more weight you get, as opposed to the other way around. So 10% doesn't make, and slowing you down by 10% is not nearly enough. But what they did figure out is loads. This is Cam Joss. And again, basically what Cam did, and Cam's in New Jersey, works for Joe DeFranco, super smart young guy. He took all of JB Marin's stuff and Cross's stuff, and he took all the like the really hard like physics things that I don't understand, and he kind of crunched all the numbers, and he basically said the right load will slow you down to 150% of your best time. So what that effectively meant is that if you can run a 1.510, you need to have a weight on that will allow you to run 2.25, 10-yard resisted. That simple. And all we did is just make a chart like, okay, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. What's 150% of that number? What he did, and you'll see. Actually, let me see if it's here. Yeah, sorry, I'll go back and show you Alex in a second. But I realized the right load usually falls between 4 and 4.5 seconds when doing a 20-yard sprint and 2 and 2.5 seconds when doing a 10-yard sprint. So what I have started doing is just aiming on the faster side of things and finding the weight they can tow that falls between 4 and 4.2 for 20 and 2 and 2.2 for 10. I love this. I love when coaches make things simple, and I love when smart people just look at something and think, okay, I'm going to make this simple. I'm going to make this easy. You don't need a chart. You don't need anything. Boom. If we're doing 10s, try to be between 2 and 2.2. If you're over 2.2, you're going too slow. The only thing you're going to have to factor in, again, if I get football, if I'm Ollie at Holy Cross, I got to start figuring out linemen because I may have some, I might have some 1.8, 1.9 kind of guys in the 10, and they may be, they could probably go to 2.5 and still be okay in terms of what the load would be. But the good thing about it is that the load is what the load is. Like you just, however fast, like that's what, so if you, Alex, sorry. Alex, the fastest girl that I have, like she's really fast. I don't know why that won't run. Wait. Oh, there we go. And I love the great thing now is you can slow-mo on your iPhone and really kind of see what you're getting. But so if you can see when she comes through, she's got 65 pounds on that sled, I think. No, she's got 45 on that one. She's got 25 and 2.10s. But she was eventually up to 65, and some of our guys were up to 90, which is much heavier than what I would have thought. The thing you've got to realize is surface matters, sled matters, humidity matters, date, time, all that stuff matters. So you can't just grab at the number. You've got to keep timing because you'll realize that depending on the day and the sled and the humidity and where you are, all those numbers can vary a little bit. So yeah, this was, like Marin was talking about, he said, except in strictly similar frictional conditions, expressing loads and percentage of body mass is inaccurate. Use time versus load. Don't worry about load because time is always going to be constant. You can't mess with time. 2.2 seconds is always going to be 2.2 seconds regardless of what else happens.
So do you time these with the timers?
Those we just been handheld timing them, like because it doesn't have to be all that accurate. It's like okay, 2, 2, 2. It's only because I didn't want to risk smashing up the timers with people hitting timers and sleds and doing some of that stuff. So it was almost like okay, I'd go and like just handheld, and if there's somewhere. The bad part is theoretically with conversions and stuff, you might get a little bit off, but if you stay in that like I'm looking for around a 2.2, I need a load that gives me 2.2. You're going to be okay with handheld, because even if handheld was 0.2 or 0.3 slower, you'd still be getting like a 2.5, which wouldn't be that far off. So just to make it easy, we handheld those. Questions about that? Because then we're going to talk a little bit about power as it applies to some other things.
Was there a slide and I may have missed it about volume? You talked about volume of sprints.
With this,
With
the sled, same idea, 2 to 3 reps. Literally, like in my mind, I just did the exact same thing. 2 to 3 reps. These basically, those would end up being in addition to and on the same day. So that actually, now the way that works, so that's a good question, thank you. That's actually part of our lift. So basically, like if we looked at like, if I put up this is where did Chris say? So, so for us, we might do like, day 1, phase 1, actually, I'm going to roll this out because we're probably going to try to make sure we can see that on film. We might do like sled push 3 times 10 and pair that with chin-ups 3 times 10. Then if we went day 2, Phase 2, we would go sled push 3 times, basically 5 steps each leg. And, chin up here, we might jump up to like 3 times 3, heavier. And then when we get here to what we're doing now, when we get to phase 3, this becomes sled run, basically times 3. So they do, they'd go over, do a sled run with whatever their load is, time it, come back. This might be some chin-up variation, let's just say 3 times 5. Go back, do another sled run, come back, do another one. So we end up shifting that stuff, 10 yards. We end up shifting that stuff into the lift.
So Mike, sorry, this is probably obvious. And the sled pushes 3 by 10 means
10 each leg. Yeah. Yep. And then 5 is 5. Because one of the things that we started, because we were trying to think like, do we think about distance? How do we do it? And I was like, why don't we just do it reps? If we do, if our like sort of base anatomical adaptation phase, is 3 times 10, then let's just do 3 times 10 each leg. So, we tell them, because we get really smart people who say you can either do 10 each leg or 20 total. And some people are like, I'll do 20. That's a serious statement actually too, which is a little bit, I'm not lying to you about that. But yeah, so that ends up kind of being the way that would go. Now I have to realize, what did I do? Oh, I put it here. Senility, just so you know, if at any point I look like I've completely lost my mind, you can say, you look like you completely lost your mind, you need to get your bearings back, because I'm not sure I still have it all anymore. So the idea is, this all carries over, because this is, like I said, horizontal. I look at that sled thing and think, horizontal power, horizontal Olympic lifting. That's the spot that it's occupying in my head right now, right? But this goes back right to the West Side Story idea. Like people looked at, why am I going to do bands or chains or whatever when I can do, and this is kind of going back to Marin's idea, when I can do things that I think are going to have way more value in terms of velocity-based training. Like I have someone, okay, no, instead I want you to, I want you to back squat, as fast as you can up and down, with a chain or a band, and you're going to get to 2 meters a second. And you're kind of like, okay, when you think about the why, what am I going for right there? And you're someone, a West Side person, well, hey, that's your dynamic day. I'm like, yeah, but what are we gaining from our dynamic day? Like, what's the purpose of that day? Would I not? And you go back to like the question, would I be better off just jump squatting if that was what I wanted? And that's probably what you would be better off doing, right? Because, and this is what I got to keep, and I have to keep saying this, but this is the biggest thing that we argue about in strength and conditioning all the time. Powerlifters are athletes, but athletes aren't powerlifters. What somebody would do to train a powerlifter does not have much value for what we want to do to train an athlete. And we need to move ourselves away from that mindset of this is the best way to get strong. I'm like, maybe, I guess, maybe, but maybe not. And then was that even what we needed, right? And it goes back to this idea, right? Because this is the problem. This is what we keep running into as coaches. It keeps coming back to, but this is what I like. Like, this is what I like to do. This is where I'm comfortable. These are the lifts I like to do. These are the things I like to teach. Ultimately, that doesn't matter. And I say that, I'm an ex-competitive powerlifter, so what I liked has changed really, really drastically over my lifetime. If you said to me, if I was perfectly healthy, would I like to compete in a powerlifting meet again? I'd be like, yes, absolutely. I liked it. It was an enjoyable experience. I enjoyed trying to lift as much weight as I could. But at no point do I want that to influence how I think about how I'm going to train people. Because to me, like apples and oranges kind of thing. Because it doesn't matter, kettlebell, West Side, triphasic, like anything. It doesn't make any difference what your particular area of interest is. We all have an area of interest. We all have an individual lens. I came up doing blank. But our biggest problem from an industry standpoint is our insertion of that blank into what everybody else is going to do. Instead of just looking, like I said, that's where we go back to like the keyhole kind of vision, looking at the big picture and saying, okay, what's the big picture here? What am I trying to get done? And ultimately, what are we trying to get done? We're trying to get people, I think faster matters more than anything else. And I don't even know what comes in second in terms of team sport. So when we start talking about power development, and this goes same thing, total system load is the key, or percentage of best vertical jump. So total system load, what total system load means, whatever I'm going to do from an explosive standpoint, I have to add my body weight into that load. So whenever anybody talks about like it's, because what we're going to talk, let me see, because we're going to, this is one of my new favorite power development exercises, which of course I can't, I don't know why I can't get these clips to play the way I want them to. Oh, there we go. Right? That's Rich Hill, pitches for the Dodgers. We brought our just jump. He's just jumping on the just jump. But the point is, what matters, that total system load, Rich weighs about 225, the bar is 45, so that's about 270 pounds. That's the total system load. That's ultimately what matters. But what matters more in that particular situation is what percentage of his vertical jump is that? Because when we start looking at power development, what we used to do, and this, so I'll go back to where I was, sorry. People would literally, I had a guy, and I forget, I always think I should write these things down, but somebody I knew went to a seminar, and they were talking about this same exercise, trap bar jump, and they said, yeah, 50%, we want to do it with 50% of your max, because, the power, the research shows us that 50% of the max is a sweet spot for power development. And he looked at the guy, he said, I can deadlift 500 pounds on the trap bar. He said, well, the guy was like, yeah, just put 250 on then to do jumps. And the guy was like, that's stupid. I'm not going to hurt myself trying to get off the ground with 250 pounds. But these are the kind of recommendations we see really consistently in the literature where somebody says, yeah, like 50%, 50% of your max, or, whatever, 50% of your body weight, or, just some stupid number that, again, when you look at it, you think that doesn't make any sense at all. Zero. And said, better to be thought stupid than open your mouth and provide proof. Whenever I see someone write some of that stuff down, I'm just like, did you think about what you said at all? Have you ever watched somebody? Have you ever watched, and I actually have, I've gone on the internet and tried to watch like some trap bar jumps with like 225. It is not a pretty sight. It gets scary looking. You're looking, ooh. And people, in the argument, one of the people, and we're going to talk about Olympic lifting a little bit anyway, but somebody said, what's the difference between that and cleaning? I said, the difference in Olympic lifting is you're catching the bar. Totally different. You try to catch the bar when the bar is not moving. You don't get this acceleration due to gravity coming down on you like you do when you trap bar jump. And so I was like, my rationale was, it's completely different. They're apples and oranges. They're not anywhere near the same thing. If I jump with 225, I am going to get a distractive force of 225 pounds times the acceleration due to gravity on my glenohumeral joint and on my brachial plexus and on my cervical spine on the way down from that jump. That's not very pretty. So what we did is we went lighter. And like I said, because the physics are different on the way down, I really like this trap bar jump if you don't have a captive audience. I love Olympic lifting. We're not ever going to stop Olympic lifting, Anthony. That's why I said I'd get to that. We're never going to not clean. But yet, if you watch my pro hockey group this summer, probably 80% of the guys, 90% will trap bar jump and not clean. Because 90% of the guys that I come in do not have good Olympic lifting backgrounds. They are not good Olympic lifters. And I have 12 weeks with them. And I don't want to spend 12 weeks trying to make somebody good at the clean when I can try to make them more powerful. So this ended up becoming a really great tool for us last summer. And then, like I said, with our baseball guys, great tool for our baseball guys who we don't want to beat up their wrists. We don't want to beat up their elbows. We don't want to beat up their shoulders by having them Olympic lift. So we've never had them Olympic lift, but we haven't had really good alternatives from an explosive power standpoint for those people. And then, do you even remember who was the first, whose idea was this? Because I'd love to say this was somebody's idea. Do we know? Yeah. Rajesh? Okay. Maybe it was. That wouldn't surprise me. But somebody in our little circle of people somewhere was talking about trap bar jumps, and I went, that's kind of a cool idea. I have to at least think about that. But what we thought about, right? Like I said here, and this is Miles Wood. Miles has got a 36-inch vertical. And he's got 90 pounds. And that looks pretty good. And so it passes sort of my shit test. I always said the shit test is if it looks like shit, it's probably shit. Like if I saw that with 225 and I got like a, ooh, kind of feeling when I saw it coming down, I'd be like, that doesn't pass the test. I don't like that. But you take someone like him, super explosive, and 90 pounds is still a reasonable load for him. So I think we had a couple guys play around with 135 pounds, but nobody went over 135 pounds. And the vast majority never even went to that because they didn't have the kind of horsepower that Woody has. But what we did, yes, Mike?
What percent of their burden are you trying to hit?
So we started out this, thank you, that's the next thing. So what we were trying to figure out is, all right, how do we determine that load? And initially when I started out with Craig Breslow and Rich and those guys, my pitching group, I just was like, let's try to get 80% of their best vertical jump for no particular reason. And I just was like, let's see what that looks like. So we just had them, they did a vertical jump on the just jump, and then they did a trap bar jump. So sorry, we're writing down the things that we want to try. And what we realized initially, someone like Craig, not super explosive, 37 years old, he's pitched majors for a long time. Initially, we went back to dumbbell jumps with him because I felt like we weren't getting it 80% with 45 pounds, but we were with 35 pounds. Within a week, we were able to do it, but we started at 80. 80 looked good. Guys wanted to go heavier. I said, well, let's experiment. Let's see what 70 looks like. What does 21 look like for a guy with a 30-inch vertical jump? Because that's going to be that's what 70 would be. And 21 looked pretty good. And the loads looked pretty good. And so we went to 70. Then what we realized when we did go back to that 150%, what it tells you is 66 is basically the same math. If you just reverse the math, you end up where if you can get 66. So now going to like what Cam Joss said, just round it off to 70. It's a lot harder, if I'm looking, what's 66% of 30? Okay, I can't do that in my head. What's 70% of 30? I can easily get the 21 out in my head with no problem. So we kind of moved that down a little bit lower. And I'm comfortable at 70. I don't think I'd be comfortable at 60. At 60, the loads would be too heavy. And it doesn't, just the eye test part, like you look at it. And they said, Woody, that's weird. And like I said, this kid's a real stud. He's a 104 flying 10, 36-inch vertical. But if you look at that, eye test wise, you're like, yeah, that looks good. I'm comfortable with that. Now what I want to do is one or the other. I either want to increase the load slightly or I want to try to get a higher percentage so that I can kind of apply my progressive resistance concept to that a little bit. This is interesting. This is Joe Whitney, not nearly as explosive as Woody. But again, at 45, he looks good. Like you look at it and think, I'm good with that. So I think there's a huge eye test component to some of this power stuff of just looking at it and thinking, okay, would I be good with him going to 65 next time he does it? Yeah. And I'm gonna make him get back on the mat and see if he still falls in that 70% range. And if he does, I'm gonna let him do that and maybe a little bit more the next time that we do it. So we're gonna just gradually do the exact same thing.
Like, is this a situation where with the trap bar, with velocity-based training, if you had a velocity-based training system that would track either the trap bar and or the athlete, then you would just say...
I'd actually rather use the percentage of vertical jump than try to get a meter per second number because I think it's easier. And it's cheaper. The just jumps are 500, Chris? Yeah. Just jumps are 500. I think your cheapest velocity-based tool is probably going to come in at over like Tendo, probably at 1,000. So I'm a huge proponent of just buy a bunch of just jumps because it's easier. And so this goes back, Anthony's saying, to Olympic lift and not to Olympic lift. But for adults, yes, sir.
Do you prefer the continuous jumping or the stick each landing jump?
Initially, we're going to stick each landing, and then eventually we're going to move to more continuous repeat kind of jump. Same thing that we do sort of from a plyometric standpoint. But I think the biggest thing with everybody, and particularly if you're in more of the adult fitness world, is just that shit test. What does it look like? When I look at it, do I think, I like the way that looks. That looks safe. That I'm comfortable with my client doing that. Or, if you look at it and go if you wince a little when you look at it, that's a bad thing. So that's why I said Olympic lifting. If we're talking about adult fitness, I do not think anybody in the adult world has any business Olympic lifting anymore. We do not, we have, well, I won't say we don't Olympic lift any of our adult clients. We do have a few who really insist on it and want to do it. And if they're in one-on-one training situations, we let that happen. But in general, we don't let our adult clients do any Olympic lifting at all. But the reason I threw this stuff in is because I posted some Olympic lifting video, and it's really interesting. Again, I love Twitter. I love the Twitter world reaction. And it's amazing. The reaction to our Olympic lifting technique is almost universally negative. And it will be, people will be like, they're stomping their feet, they donkey kick themselves in the ass, they rock, you know, they don't get triple extension, you let them use straps. And I'm like, yes, all of the above, yes. We let them do all that stuff. I don't really care. Because what I really care about from an Olympic lifting standpoint with an athlete is if I tell you I got X amount of weight at point A, and I want you to get X amount of weight to point B, ultimately what I'm worried about is, did you safely get X amount of weight from point A to point B? If you rocked or shifted or stomped the floor or kicked your heels up, I don't really care. I don't really get that worried about it. But I still am a huge believer. I think if you're training athletes and you're in a high school situation, I'd spend the time. I'd absolutely positively spend the time to teach these kids to Olympic weightlift. The biggest reason, and this is when Anthony said, are you ever going to get away from Olympic weightlifting? I think Olympic weightlifting is the biggest accidental injury prevention that we do. And I think most of the time we don't even realize we're doing it. But when you get a kid, you know, like a college football kid who can hang clean 320 pounds and he can catch 320 pounds, he can get whacked, jolted with 320 pounds. That guy's much less likely to be injured, I think, than his counterpart who can't do that. Maybe it's somebody who does pulls and drops it or does whatever. Like, I think the catching part of Olympic lifting ends up having a huge amount of value that we've never actually thought about. And so, you know, and sometimes they look like we've always caught. We've never not let people catch their Olympic lifts. And we also have had a very low incidence of concussion, separated shoulder, like a lot of these other things that kind of go along with that. And if you kind of go back, like if you've ever listened to McGill talk, he talks about pulsing. And he said people that are really efficient are people that can double pulse. And I was like, Olympic lifting's double pulse. You know, Olympic lifting, literally, I'm here, and all of a sudden I got to produce a force really, really quick. Boom! And then I got to be able to produce another one right here. I've got to produce an accelerated force and a decelerated force in, you know, really, really short period of time. So I think in spite of maybe not having great carryover to speed, it has huge injury prevention value. So that's why I would worry about it. I already talked about that. So, but this, and I use this quote all the time, we want great athletes that are good weightlifters. I don't need great Olympic weightlifters. I just need good Olympic weightlifters. I need people that are doing it, that it's safe.
Do you do the trap bar jumps on the just jump mat?
Initially, yes. We don't have enough mats, so once we get the load selected, we'll let guys move away from the mats. But initially, yes, to try to make sure that we're in the right load category.
So they can handle, the mats are durable enough.
Yeah, the mats are, yeah, you'll see. I brought my mat because they didn't have one in stock, so you'll see when we get in there. But it's interesting because like Brian Mann, if you read his velocity-based training book, he was kind of comes out a little wishy-washy on Olympic lifting. But when you read the quotes, you know, one of the things he said is you have to continually coach form. Yes, you do. And one of the things he said is we either had to change the way we do them or drop them altogether. Because one of the things he said in his football program was that the majority of his guys were not probably really good Olympic lifters. And as a result, they weren't getting out of Olympic lifting what he wanted them to get out of Olympic lifting. But I think when you paraphrase Brian's stuff, if you read his book, Olympic lifting have probably gotten a bad rep, or a bad rap actually is probably a better term, because most people coach them poorly and use too much weight. We've really gotten away from a weight-focused Olympic lifting program and gone much more to a speed-focused Olympic lifting type program where, you know, what I really care is like how quick does the bar move? I don't really care how much you clean, but I really care how fast the bar goes. So if you look, this is Mark, who I was talking about earlier, and this is kind of interesting. This was actually a heavily criticized clip, which I think is really interesting. So he's 12 at this time. And he definitely stomps his feet, and I've never taught him to stomp his feet. I never said stomp your feet. And I don't know if he's ever watched anybody who stomped his feet. He also moves backwards a little bit. Like, there's lots of things to critique. This is him at 13. And this is a mat, like this was the heaviest weight he'd ever done. So this is like 80 pounds for 3. And it's weird, less foot stomp. 14. 120. right? But the point is, if you watch that as an Olympic lifting coaches watch that, and some of them are literally like cringeworthy, horrible. And I look at it and think, not bad. 14-year-old kid, he's getting better. But the point is, I don't see anything unsafe about it. I don't like look at him and think, oh, he's going to get hurt because he did blank. Do I look at it and think, yes, we could do this better? Yeah. Will he be a better Olympic lifter at 16 than he is at 14? I hope so. But I do think with kids, like getting kids to learn to Olympic lift, I don't believe there is a better coordinative thing that you can do with a kid than Olympic lifting, provided it is done correctly and taught well and not taught as like a, how much weight can you lift kind of thing, but rather, can you get the load to move from A to B fast? This was what's really interesting, and this is what you have to do on Twitter. People were like, he gets no extension. He doesn't get any triple extension. And then I was like, actually, so I slow-moed it, I paused it, and I shot a picture of it. I was like, he is absolutely positively getting at least double extension. I said, if you look, it looks like he's on his toes a little bit, but you can't tell because the chalk thing's in the way. But he clearly has extended his hips and extended his knees. And it's interesting because we get criticized a lot because we're fast. And I keep, I think Callie's here too, actually. This is me. This is interesting too. This is also the same progression, which is kind of cool. One of the things I would tell you is to make sure, shoot lots of video of your kids doing stuff. And I don't mean your children, your athletes, because particularly the way the iPhone is, this takes it takes about 2 seconds, in iMovie to be able to put these little compilations together. But this is the same thing. So she's 12. This is Mark's friend since he was little. She's a better Olympic lifter than he is, clearly, from a technical standpoint. She also, at this age, at 12, is probably a better athlete than he is, right? And this is her, 13. Now this one's ugly, but this is 14, and this is okay. I'm going to try. This is trying to think what this is. It's 35, 85. That's 95 for 5, which for a 14-year-old girl that weighs $120, it's pretty good. But the point is, we've been doing this with kids. We have yet to have a problem. And again, from an injury, we haven't had any injuries with them training, and we also haven't had any injuries with them playing. So now is it, what is the injury prevention value of this stuff? I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'd be lying if I told you that I could say. But same thing. It's interesting because same criticism. I post the same clip, no triple extension. That's a still from that same exact thing. And then it was really funny. This is how I love Twitter. You know what the guy said when he saw this picture? Yeah, but the bar's away from her. Exactly, the bar's away from her body. I was like, oh yeah, you gotta have your gotcha moment. It's like, yeah, well, she did do the thing I said she didn't do, but she didn't do something else. Exactly, it's moving fast. That's what you want. Exactly, like A to B, boom, move it.
When you coach kids or you start teaching them how to do it, what are the criteria? How do you teach it? What are the things?
So for us, we have a whole teaching progression. If you go on YouTube and just type in Mike Boyle clean progression, it will come up. And we teach them initially, we call it hands-free front squat because we want them to understand how to hold the bar. Then we teach them to front squat because we want them to understand the finish position. Then we teach them what we would call a high hang clean or a position 1 clean, where they're really almost coming right out of their hip pockets. And the thing about this though is that you have to be good at doing it and you have to be good at teaching it for it to be a valuable tool for you. If you're not good at doing it and you're not good at teaching it, it will not be a valuable tool, because the number one thing, and I used to always laugh, I tell Ollie this, the kids learn to do it the way you do it. So I can literally tell, on our staff, I can tell who taught who to clean. I can, because these kids are incredibly visual, and what they learn best from is seeing somebody doing the lifts. So for us, in our internship program, one of the biggest emphasis in our internship program is being able to do the lifts. You have to be able to do everything. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how much weight you can do. But we've got Jocelyn, she can probably clean, 90 or 90 pounds for reps right now. And I tell her all the time when the kids are bitching about the weight being too much, I'm like, just go in front of them and clean it. know, she's probably, I don't know, she's probably not 130 pounds. But, you know, you've got to get everybody to be, if you're going to do it, you got to be proficient at it. And I could spend all day talking about Olympic lifting, but I'm not going to. Same thing. So this is Callie Flanagan, another one of our Olympic girls, so she was just won a gold medal in, this was another one, great. I love this clip. Because watch what happens. This is really interesting. I couldn't believe until I saw the slow motion clip what actually happened in her lift. She literally was off the ground. And it was kind of like, and I just videoed it because I want to get a clip of her cleaning. So I said, I'll click slow-mo. And then I did it. And then I watched and I was like, wow, she literally left the ground. What we find when we slow-mo video all our kids now, almost all of them actually leave the ground. Which an Olympic lifter would tell you that means the weight is too light. But I would look at it and think, I don't really, you know, if we end up where there's an actual weightless period, I'm good with that. But same thing, slow-mo, clip, boom, you know, right at the 22-second mark. Exactly what we want to have happen. And this same thing, guy watched that clip and said, she doesn't get any extension. And I was like, actually, watch it. She does. And so I literally watched it, pause, screenshot, post a screenshot. That's pretty much exactly what you wanted to have happen. The only difference with her is that she kept going and actually left the ground. So probably too late. Doesn't really matter. So we'll talk briefly. I'm going to try to get this done by 3:30. Which will give us an hour and a half to go in the weight room and do some question and answer stuff. But Squattober, it's the worst month of the year for me. Because I have to watch people on my staff make asses of themselves, or former people, like former interns, posting these ridiculous videos of themselves squatting, and then I get frustrated and think, did they learn nothing during the time that they were with me, right? As you can tell, I am not a back squat fan. And I honestly can tell you, I don't think that anybody should back squat. I don't think it's a good exercise. I'll say that again on camera, and Pat will probably make it into a promotional clip for this thing, and it'll make more people hate me. But you can't use the West Side stuff as promotional clips because I'll probably get like beat up by some West Side guy. So, but that's where I'll draw the line. But right, and I always tell you, people get hurt squatting, and what do they want to do? They want to get back to squatting, right? They're always like, I'm going to physical therapy. I'm doing it. I can't wait till I can squat again. And I always think if I substituted slamming your hand in the car door for squatting, and we had the same conversation where you said, yeah, last week I slammed my hand in the car door, broke 5 of my fingers, and I'm, working on my range of motion. Can't wait till I can get back to the car and whip my hand in that door again, right? You'd think you're a complete idiot. Yet for some reason in strength training, our burning desire to get back to that same exercise is not frowned upon in the same way. And I don't get it. We have not had, and again, I say we have not had great long-term success with back squatting. And again, if you go into sort of the internet world, everybody's criticism is like, that's because you're a shitty coach and you don't know how to coach the squat. And I'm like, I don't really think that's what it is. I think that it's not necessarily a great lift. And we're going to talk a little bit quickly about why it's not a great lift, because I've banged this drum, as I said, before, right? I said 80s and 90s, I added strength and dysfunction for a living. Greg Cook always says, don't add strength and dysfunction. And I'm like, shit, I did it as a job, right? College strength coach, that's what you did. You took guys that moved shitty, and you just asked them, can you move shitty with more weight, right? That was a pretty ugly squat with 400 pounds. Let's try 410, right? That was our job. That's what we did. And honestly, that is what we did. There are probably some guys right now in extreme back pain somewhere at some part of the country that's 100% my fault. Because I just was like, whatever. Coach wants to know how many guys we got who can squat 400, right? But what I want you to ask yourself is, why do you squat yourself, or why do your athletes squat? Because we got to go back to that start with why idea. Do you really believe that it's like the king of all lifts?
They do.
Yeah. So I mean, why? Who's the prince? Is there a queen of lifts? You know what I mean? When you think about that stuff, it's dumb. Some guy said the squat is the king of all lifts. And then he put that squatting poem up on his wall, the one about if you where the plates ride high and only real men come, it's like, come on. Seriously, this is why you do an exercise? Because there's some meathead powerlifter, wrote a poem and said that this is the most important lift that you're going to do. It's not great when you're thinking about, I want concrete rationale for why I'm using this lift. It is not really effective evidence, right? Or Is it because my high school coach said squats are the king of all lift, and he had the squat form on his wall, right? It was both of all of the above. And it's just funny because so many of us do it because somebody at some point told us it was a really important thing to do. And we've just never questioned whether or not that was actually true. I'm going to question whether or not it was really true. There's Ollie. Ollie can't remember this conversation. And I've said this before, and he's like, I don't remember ever having this conversation. But the most interesting thing about this is that the guys that finally got me to say, okay, like we eliminated back squat altogether. We front squatted for a long time, probably a decade where we only did front squats. Then I literally saw a video of one of Joe DeFranco's guys doing heavy rear foot elevated split squats, Bulgarian lunges, right? Which are neither Bulgarian nor lunges because you can't be stationary and lunge. So that's another semantical linguistic thing. But the guy was banging out reps with 120-pound dumbbells. I was like, wow, that's a lot. That's 240 pounds. That's a lot of weight. Jeff had said to me once before, which he does not remember, when we were having this sort of squat debate, he said, would you stop squatting altogether if you could figure out a way to test single leg strength? And I was like, yep, I absolutely would. If I could figure out some way to monitor single leg strength, I would just stop doing bilateral squatting altogether. The combination of Joe's guy with the 120s and Jeff's idea in my head, I said, what if I just went and tested split squat? What if I just said to somebody, okay, how much can you split squat? And so what we did, I got to see. Sorry, I didn't do it, damn. Actually, I'm going to do this because it's actually pretty timely. Sorry, excuse me, I'm going to jump out and jump right back in again. So this is basically what we did. And it's funny, the term rear foot elevated split squat actually goes to my friend Craig Friedman, who was an Exos guy. He was like, one day we were arguing about this and he was like, Mike, it is a rear foot elevated split squat. That is the name. And I remember thinking like, you're right. It's a rear foot elevated split squat. That's the correct name. So I've always kept that name. But now watch this guy. Because this is what we did. So what I used to do, the best thing about what we were able to do, so Charlie Coyle, scorer of the game winner the other day for the Bruins. But all we did was say, grab the heaviest weight you can, do as many reps as you can. That was our testing protocol. Charlie's a pretty competitive character. He grabbed the 120s, which were the biggest dumbbells that we had. He's going to proceed to do 17 reps of this whatever rear foot elevated split squat with 240 pounds. It's a lot of weight. I mean, if you try to somehow do the math, and the interesting thing about this, so what you realize happens here is really important because watch, he's going to fail right now. Boom. And he almost freaking breaks his toes, which would have been a real anticlimactic finish to that. Luckily, he's a really good athlete. But the point being, in that particular situation, all we did was like, all right, let's throw some shit against the wall and see if it sticks. Let's say to these guys, so what I said was take the heaviest weight you think you can do for 5 reps, do as many reps as you can do, and you can stop when you get to 20. That was sort of the protocol that we gave them. Crazily, almost like he was one of the few guys who didn't get 20 because he picked up the heaviest weights. Got 17. But no one's back failed. And that was the one thing that stuck in my head. Was that no one's back was sore. No one complained about back soreness. They complained about crippling leg soreness because this was off season. It didn't matter. We did it. That was probably in like May. And guys came in and they were like, I can't move. I can't walk. That's like the worst thing we've ever done. And I was like, how's your back feel? Oh, my back feels fine. My ass is killing me. My adductors are killing me. My legs are killing me. Everything's killing me, but my back does not hurt. And we just kept playing with this idea that,
You make them do it again on the other leg, right?
yeah, we make them. And what we did, actually, it's interesting, is we let them stop, though. We were going every other guy. They didn't have to follow up immediately because we realized like they couldn't do it. The guy couldn't just do 20 and then drop the dumbbells and turn around and do it again. So it was sort of like, okay, what we ended up doing is everyone did right leg and then everyone did left leg. But we were making stuff up, literally, because no one had ever done anything like this. We had no idea what the kind of outcomes were going to be. But, the basic idea, so we said, should everyone squat? Should anybody squat? This is the thing to think about. Like, you were funny. You said you were made to squat, right? The one thing is that people who like to squat in general were made to do the lift. I never had a problem. I was a good squatter. I liked it. It was easy for me. I used to torture poor Jeff with squatting. If you look at Jeff's leg length to torso length, it was never a good lift for him. But in 1980, whatever, when I was torturing him doing it, I wasn't smart enough to understand that it wasn't a good lift for his body type. I just didn't get it. And I think that's the point that we're at with a lot of people, is they don't get it, right? But this is interesting. So Franz Bosch, not only is the value of deep squats questionable, but so is the claim that double leg squats are particularly suitable for improving strength in the legs. Strength in the back muscles may be the limiting factor rather than strength in the legs, and so double leg squats may in fact be a maximal strength exercise for the back muscles. That's effectively what I said in that Death of Squatting clip in 09. I looked it up. That your back gives out. If you watch squatting and you watch somebody fail, you never see what you saw with Charlie in that clip. You don't see somebody where they can't do another rep with their legs. They buckle. They fold. All the time. Watch, I've been to a lot of powerlifting meets. You almost never see a guy lose it in the bottom. Never. Usually the guy gets up, usually his ass gets up, usually his head gets forward, bars get dumped over their head. There's all kinds of things that happen. But it's never something where you look and think his legs had no more juice in them. Think about this. Bodybuilders knew it. Bodybuilders knew it in the 70s. They'd always say, yeah, squat, do your set of squats, then jump on the leg press, then jump on the leg extension if you really want to exhaust your legs. Because they knew intuitively that my back won't let me squat to the point where I've totally worked my legs. And not that that's a good method, but it just shows you intuitively that bodybuilders knew that squatting was a back-limited exercise. It is a back-limited exercise. How many people here have ever had an athlete hurt their knee squatting? Anybody? No, I don't know anybody. I've never seen an athlete hurt their knee squatting. Have you had one? You were looking like you have. Really? One? Yeah. You're the lone wolf. But I mean, literally, I never, not once. But if you ask me how many backs in 38 years have I seen? A couple dozen probably, back spasms laying on the floor kind of deal from an ugly set of squats. So we just realize it's not, when it fails, what fails are back muscles. This is the most interesting thing. I should have pulled up this Jim Wendler, look, of all, West Side guy, right? Of all people that you'd think would be pro West Side. Goblet squats and push-ups. He said that was our high school strength program. That's all we did. We did goblet squats, we did push-ups. And it's actually, there's some really good, go on YouTube and type in Jim Wendler on high school strength training. And it was very surprising, but also really intuitive, right? But loaded squats, because this is the thing, loaded squats versus squat pattern, I think everybody should be able to squat. Don't get this part wrong. And I do think squatting, there are some good ideas. I just don't think back squatting is a good idea. And I think unilateral squatting is going to be much better in the long run than back squatting. And this was Kevin's analogy. I think Kevin must have had to sneak out. But, the thing that Kevin said is, what if Big Macs were $4 and half Big Macs were $1.50? Would you walk in and insist on having the whole Big Mac? If you said, I can get the same thing, I can pay $3 if I just take the two halves. That's bilateral versus unilateral. When you're looking at unilateral, the cost is so much less from an orthopedic standpoint. And the benefit is more. And in a couple minutes, you'll see one of Devin's guys. The thing that we realize is that the benefit is also higher. That's the part that you don't realize. Like I said, bilateral versus unilateral. In 2009, this is when Death of Squatting came out, I was literally an internet joke. And so this, Mike Guadango, who was one of Joe DeFranco's guys who used to work for him at his gym, this was him on his podcast. He said, I remember saying to myself when I was younger that Mike Boyle was such a pussy for advocating all this unilateral training. Now I find myself kicking myself. This was Joe DeFranco and Cam Joss on Joe's podcast. Remember the shit Boyle caught when he said he doesn't have his athletes barbell squat. How can he do this? This guy is nuts. It's sacrilegious. right? But both of these were guys talking about what unilateral training. Now, they're both unilateral training proponents. But in 2009, when they first saw this, they were like, this is the worst thing anybody has ever said. But what Joe said, and he's right, when you work with college kids, you get away with a lot more. They're resilient. They also have something called the training room. So when you hurt them, you just send them away. It was nice having you here. Please leave and go down the hallway to the trainers. In private sector stuff, you don't have that. In personal training, you don't have that. You hurt somebody doing something stupid, you eat it. You're in trouble, and you got to figure out a way to solve it. You can't be like, oh, go see the trainer, right? And I was said in college, they have what are called freshmen. They were really almost like disposables. You can hurt lots of them, and no one really cares, because they're not playing. So we get away with not being very good strength coaches a lot in the collegiate environment because we can. You do this, again, if you look at why do you see more unilateral training in the pros? Why don't you see people doing heavy back squats in the pros? Because guys know their jobs are on the line if things go badly. You get a bunch of guys hurt in a pro team in the weight room, you're going to have a problem. And it will be relatively quick, right? But this is the most important thing. And I've said this, and I'm going to say it again, and I'll probably say it in Functional Strength Coach 8, and I'll probably say it in Functional Strength Coach 9. This bilateral deficit is real, okay? The bilateral limb deficit describes the difference in maximal or near maximal force generating capacity of muscles when they are contracting alone or in combination with the contralateral muscles. A deficit occurs when the summed unilateral force is greater than the bilateral force. So basically meaning if I add right leg plus left leg, does that equal more than both legs? In every case, it does. And the more you look for it, the more you will see it. It is absolutely, positively right there, staring us in the face, right? It's right. So this is where you can read about it if you have this book, Strength and Power in Sport, this Comey book. I thought I had the page reference, but I don't, but it's right there. That's another reason why you shouldn't squat. Now you look at that, think, of course, like they're right, totally different. Foot different height. Megan's 5 feet tall, Sydney's 5 feet 11. There are 11 inches difference in height. Their spines are exactly the same length. Megan's going to be a really good squatter. It's going to be very easy for her. Sydney is not going to be a very good squatter. It's not going to be very easy for her. When you look at this view, it's so obvious, right? Sydney's got 11 inches more femur and tibia than Megan. I mean, they're literally sitting, and it's a pretty good view, but they're sitting on identical 12-inch boxes. And if we literally put a level on their head, you'd see that they're exactly the same height. They have the same spines. So what you realize is that's why I said, squatting for you, you're going to be great. You're made for it. Squatting for Ollie, not made for it. Long femurs, shorter torso, right? You and Bunky sit next to each other. You're a little taller than Bunky, right? Yeah, but if you stand up, probably 6 inches, right? This is another reason everybody shouldn't squat. Look at those. Those are both femurs. We would operate under the idea that all bones are identical. But if you've ever listened to McGill talk, he'll talk about, oh, that's a Scottish hip, or that's a Swedish hip, or that's an Irish hip, or whatever. And I used to be kind of like, does that really make a difference? And you realize, yeah, it does. Because your ability to, how your hip, like those things, that left-hand hip is a 90-degree turn. The right-hand hip is a 45-degree turn. That's a significant difference. And I can't tell you I know enough about hips. One of those people is going to squat a lot better than the other. And I'm going to probably guess it's the 45-degree person is going to be a better squatter than the 90-degree person, but I might be wrong, right? And if you look at here, where the center of gravity does, long femur versus short femur, all this stuff factors in. There's all these reasons why this isn't a good idea. But this is because I want to get to deadlift, but what we need to understand is that we know what the back doesn't like. The back doesn't like inflexibility, right? Because we get into bad positions when we're not flexible. We know that, right? We know the back doesn't like torque. Heavy rotational loads are not going to be good for your back. We know the back doesn't like shear. Like this kind of stuff, bar in the back, forward leaning, back's not going to like that, right? Your back also doesn't like compression. It doesn't like your discs to be squished. Squatting has all of these things, right? Particularly, like, we think, inflexibility. I always say, so we had this happen one time totally by accident. What we realized, we were doing wall slides. And I realized, so if I'm here, I can't do a really good wall slide. For me to get my hands against the wall, what do I need to do? I need to arch my back. So the compensation for lack of shoulder external rotation is lumbar extension. Which means if I'm tight through my upper body, I am going to automatically put more load in my lumbar spine. Because I can't, in order to get that bar where I need it to go, I have to arch my back more than I want to. That one, when I started to understand that, that explained to me why sometimes I would see what I thought were perfect squats and someone would still say their back hurt. And I'd realize it's because what we're getting is that's now like a facet extension kind of load versus the flexion loads that we were worried about. But they're all things that we got to worry about. And this is interesting because this is disc pressures, right? You know, bars like these shear type forces, things out in front of you are going to be fairly high. This is really interesting. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about with squatting. Highest disc pressures, picking up weights from the floor seated. So this is a really good reason. If you have people with back pain, don't do dumbbells. Because the worst thing you can do to them is ask them to pick up dumbbells off the floor to try to do dumbbell bench press or dumbbell incline bench press. Because that's, look at it, 275 newtons. You know, pretty much double or 2.7 times what it would be in standing. But the important thing is to look at the shear forces of the fourth, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one, right? And then compression, obviously, right? Look at that. I mean, that's all of the above, right? Compression, torque, shear, like everything that could go wrong has gone wrong in that squat. That kid's probably going to sue me someday because I use his picture all the time. But he was on the internet. I'm hoping it's fair game. But, you know, we see all stuff, and I could go on forever. But so this is interesting. This is Winston Justice, who was actually a football player at USC, played in the NFL for a little bit. But we did, at BU one year, we just compared, when we talk about bilateral deficit, I did a test. We basically did a back rear foot elevated split squat and a 1RM front squat. The front squat, we did 1RM. Here we did like a rep max test. But then we projected out the load. This is Colin Wilson, plays for Colorado. But the interesting thing here, this was one of the things that really opened my eyes. Absolutely dead even. So we had 20 guys at that time, and of those 20 guys, their front squat and their split squat were plus or minus 5 pounds. That's, I mean, a massive illustration of this bilateral deficit idea in terms of, you know, I had guys that could, you know, front squat 315, and when we projected out their split squat single leg, they were at 315 or 310. So it's, you know, it's data, and more data. Here's data. This is Mark, my son. That's 90. Every one of the kids that I train can split squat what they can goblet squat. And this is a little sloppy, but that's also 90. Just as easy for him as the two-legged version was. And this is my point about the bilateral. You know, people will be like, oh, but he's using his back leg. No matter what he's doing with his back leg, it doesn't account for the differences that you're seeing in terms of he's using the exact same weight in a single leg exercise that he uses in a double leg exercise, and it looks exactly the same. That's got to get you thinking like, ooh, this bilateral deficit thing is pretty real, right? Same way, Mia, this is same thing, 90. And yes, I know her heels are off the board, and I yelled at her about it. She's a beast. That's actually 65, but she did 90. I just didn't have the video clip of it. But all these kids, they all can do unilaterally what they can do bilaterally. That has to hit you somewhere in the head and make you think, something's going on here, right? Yeah, you know what? We were meant to be on one leg. It's the way things work. It's why we run the way we run, jump the way we jump. You know, if you ask somebody, if you say jump up and touch something, most people will jump off one leg. But if the bilateral deficit thing wasn't real, right, you should be able to jump twice as high from a standing 2-foot start as you can off one leg. Why can't you? You can't, because neurologically that's not the way you were made to operate. And we did it. We did unilateral hops and tested everybody unilateral hop to bilateral jump. 30% generally, somewhere between 20 and 30% bilateral deficit, meaning, if we had, like we did it with our Olympic girls, if we had a girl that could vertical jump 24, then her unilateral hops were like somewhere in the 15 and 15 range. So 15 right leg, 15 left leg, 24 both legs. 30% difference in the two. And I'm saying if you can do it over and over again, and you'll find it over and over again, trust me. This is one of Devin's guys. This is one of, I think, the most convincing. This 505, right?
That's 515, I think.
515, okay.
550.
And again, with people, like we could argue about the depth, we could argue about a lot of stuff, but watch how easily this guy moves 515 pounds. I am convinced, that if we put 1,030 on there, he probably wouldn't be able to do that, right? I mean, he literally does 515 pounds and Devin's he's actually done more of this loaded than I've done because he's been playing with, he's had a good team environment now longer than I have. I don't have these guys year round anymore, so I've kind of fallen behind. But a lot of the stuff that he sends me, it's just, you get into the category of like being like the flat earth guy or the covered wagon guy because you're just denying what is incredibly obvious science. It is sticking right in your face that this stuff is there. Same way, if you look at like this is Megan Duggan, who's captain of our Olympic team. This is, trying to think, it's 150 pounds. So those are 75-pound kettlebells, I think 36 kilos or something like that. But again, she rips off 10 really easy. I don't think she can squat 300 pounds once. I know she's never tried, but I mean, easy set of 10, with 150 pounds. So it gets hard to look at the people and think this isn't working. And then when you think like, okay, who's working in bilateral stance anyway? Maybe occasionally, we could have the argument that everybody wants to have, the blocker in volleyball, the guy going up for a rebound in basketball. Yes, there are going to be some isolated sports skill situations where people are going to actually bilaterally use, this kind of pattern. But really, they're not. It's more of an Olympic lifting pattern, so it doesn't even really matter. So, but now watch. This is Cam Joss on the left. He sent me. This is one of his football guys. I think this is 405. And this is what's interesting. I've never tried this stuff with like the real beasts of the world in terms of, NFL caliber guys. This guy's an NFL caliber running back. Like I look at that and think it's almost a little scary to watch. But he's basically doing a step back lunge with 405 pounds. And Cam's the same way as me. He's like, I see this all the time now. If I try it, I find it. I realize that it's there. But it's like something that I never really looked for it. So I never really thought it might be present, right? And this study, unilateral training is better for change direction. Obvious, right? Would it not make sense that your ability to put the brakes on would be related to unilateral training? But the good thing is they're doing more of this research, and the research continues to mount. And one of the guys, one of the Twitter arguments I got was that, well, there's a lot of evidence that squats correlate to a lot of stuff too. And I said, no, there's not a lot of evidence at all for squats. There's a lot of evidence for lower body strength as measured by squats. And that was my argument for him. I said, if the only test you did was squatting, and then you measured some other variable, you can't really say that it was squatting. You can say that lower body strength related. So in a lot of these ways, you look and think you could make the same argument with me, but it's sort of, we've got to always look at the evidence and realize that sometimes the evidence is a little bit slanted. Effects of heavy resistance, strength, and balance training on unilateral and bilateral leg strength performance in older adults. Again, this might have been Pat who sent me this, I forget. But, again, it's the same bilateral deficit evidence stuff, the same references, right? And I said, you're always thinking, please stop. All the T Nation and Elite FTS articles say you're wrong. You can't say this anymore. I'm not going to stop, just so we know. And I always think I'm actually glad everybody's so stubborn and so dumb because it's better for us. It's better for those of us who figured it out that other people don't want to figure it out. So last thing, and I said I'm actually, well, we'll still have an hour. I just want to talk quickly about posterior chain, which we didn't get to, really. And this bilateral deficit, right? Max Shank, I've shown this clip a million times, 315 pounds. Watch this. Tell me bilateral deficit's not real. Best deadlift, I think I asked him what his best deadlift was, and I think he told me 550. Simple, rapid math tells us that that would equate to 630, right? Bilateral. He cannot deadlift that weight once bilaterally, or twice that weight. And his best deadlift is significantly less than that. And his best deadlift is actually a conventional stance deadlift, not that kind of modified stiff leg that you saw. So it's crazy. Same like Alex, 95 pounds. Like nothing, breaking sticks. You know what I mean? I have no idea. I could probably easily push these guys up to 135 pounds. But if we think about that, what's the back load? 95 pounds. Why would I do that exercise with 200 pounds when I can do it with 95 pounds? Why would I take, unless I was looking at that exercise and saying, I want it to be a lumbar erector exercise, which I'm probably not saying that. I'm probably looking at that exercise and thinking I want it to be a glute and hamstring exercise. Why would I do it with 2 legs, knowing that eventually I'd be doing it with one with more load, right? But we still do bilateral deadlift. And this, again, people will be like, that's hypocritical. I don't think it is. And this is interesting. World and European powerlifting records show that the deadlift and the squat records are within 10% of each other across all weight classes, both men's and women's, yet the deadlift works a greater percentage of muscles. Barry Ross, Underground Secrets of Faster Running. That's what Barry said. Barry was Allison Felix's coach. I remember we never deadlifted ever. And then I read that Underground Secrets of Faster Running, and Barry Ross was like, deadlifts are way better than squats because you use more muscle. So you go back to like the king of all lifts idea. He's like, squatting is not the king of all lifts. If you're thinking about total muscle mass used, there's no grip strength involved in squatting. There's no upper back strength involved in squatting. There's no, rotator cuff irradiation involved in squatting. All that stuff is involved in deadlifting and not involved in squatting. So if we're going to call somebody the king of all lifts, deadlift is going to beat squat every time, which is the reason that's really the only bilateral thing that we still do. They also, and you'll see, there's literally a laundry list of other reasons that relate to the first, right? 1, obviously better sprint angles, more posterior chain, more muscles, right? Inflexibility, not a factor, okay? I don't have to worry about being pushed into lumbar extension by trying to get my hands back. My hands are at my sides. So I've taken that one out. Torque, less of a factor. The trap bar tends to be 5 feet long versus the Olympic bar being 7 feet long. That, again, if we were a physicist, that would tell you that the torque production capability of trap bar deadlift versus squat is significantly reduced just because the bar is going to be shorter and you're going to have less torque production capability. Shear, reduced because the bar, we looked at that picture here, right, of the center of mass relationship of the bar. Deadlift, we've reduced the shear. Compression, there is no compression. We've reduced the compression when we deadlift. The other thing in this one, we switched, it was really interesting because I expected back pain and I didn't get any. And I kind of was almost head scratching in terms of why are we not getting back pain? But then I listened to McGill talk one day, and one of the things that you realize is that deadlifting is drastically different from squatting because when I go to pick the weight up, the force that is produced is what's called a flexion moment, meaning it wants to pull me this way, right? So instead of me getting compression, extension, torque, I'm getting a flexion moment. I'm getting pulled into flexion. I've got to fight to stay in extension as opposed to sort of balance myself in extension like I do in the squat. Like the squat is almost like this little precarious balancing act. Literally, like what do you watch when someone comes out of the rack, right? Heavy weight. You're like, ooh, it's like you're trying to control torque. You're trying to control, lateral flexion. There's all these things you're trying to control as you get out of there because of the distance of the bar from the center of mass. It all gets eliminated when you deadlift. So we've become much bigger deadlift people than squat people in the last, say, 5 years, right? Should everybody? Hex bar deadlift. Yep, not straight bar. Good question. Thank you. Right? Right? I'm not talking about this. Again, if you look at this, that's just dumb. Whenever I see that stuff, I just think dumb. Like, grandma does not need to deadlift. And then people get into like the whole, well, it's functional. She's gonna have to pick stuff up. I'm like, what is grandma gonna pick up that's that heavy? You know what I mean? You'd have to have like the grandchild from hell to have to be thinking getting 135 off the floor. Like, that's a pretty big load. So that's not what we're talking about. So I think everyone should deadlift. All you're saying, nobody should straight bar deadlift. I think straight bar deadlifting, I don't know why I would bother to straight bar deadlift when you can buy trap bars, because it just makes so much more sense. When you think with straight bar deadlifting, you have to worry about your shins. You have to worry about, you've got to maneuver your body around the bar. When you trap bar deadlift, and if you look, it goes back, I said, squat lifts. You're really squatting a lot of times. Some people will squat their deadlifts, and I'm fine with that. If we trap bar deadlift and I have someone who does a very squat dominant pattern while they deadlift, I'm like, I could care less. Doesn't matter to me, because what they're showing me is that, okay, this is the way that I'm built, and this is what's going to be the most efficient way for me to move this load, which I am 100% fine with. And so for us, like I said, no straight bars, kettlebell until you run out, then an elevated dumbbell, then eventually trap bar. So we're going to start here until you can handle the heaviest kettlebell. Basically, what do you have there? Sumo deadlift, right? If you really look at that sumo deadlift, if I was to freeze that like that, I mean, kind of looks like a squat, right? It looks a lot like a squat, except the weight's in your hands. And then in the last book that I wrote, one of the things that I said is we used to say things like, if the weight's in your hands, it's a deadlift. If the weight's, up here, it's a squat. But then when you get into like, well, we're doing, split squats with like suitcase dumbbells, does that make that a deadlift because the weight's in our hands? No, I'd still look at that and think it's a squat. So basically, Dan John had said in his book, he and Pavel wrote a book, I forget which book they wrote, but they said basically that deadlifts have deep movement of the hips, whereas squats have deep movement of the knees and hips. So I would almost argue that trap bar in some cases is really, you could say trap bar squat and probably be technically correct the way some people are actually doing it. Not that that matters, but I think the semantics do matter sometimes, right? This is elevated, so we're just on 6-inch plyo boxes, because what we realized when we ran out of heavier kettlebells, we just flipped the dumbbells on end, but the bigger, heavier dumbbells are longer. So the range of motion didn't end up being good enough, so we just went elevated. Once they can do that, like for us, we'd get to 120 for 10, which people would get to really easily. When they could do 120 for 10, then we'd kind of get out of that sumo stance and go back to conventional deadlift stance, and most people would convert really well. Like I said, if you look at me, and I've gotten more comfortable with the high handle idea. She's not tall. But if I'm just thinking bilateral loading, he is taller, Robbie's 5'10". But it's funny, all these kids now, they're all deadlifting, between 185 and 205 at 14. They all weigh, somewhere in like the 125 to 145 kind of range. But these are all kids that we taught in the same way. This is awesome right here. Ken, this is Kendall Coyne. That's 315. She weighs 125 pounds. She's the fastest woman on ice in the world. If you watch the NHL All-Star game, she was the one she beat Clayton Keller, who is on one of the NHL teams in Arizona. She beat him in a one-lap sprint, but 315 for 3. And this is actually an Orange Theory coach, Marissa Macario from Marblehead, 280 for 5. It's just crazy that we've done way more trap bar deadlifting and we've had very, very few real issues with it. So I've become a much bigger deadlift fan. This is what's interesting. We used to call this a skater squat, but now I'll use that as a unilateral version of the trap bar deadlift. If someone says to me they have back pain, then we're going to do, because it's really interesting, and Vinny did a good job with this. Vinny Toledo did a nice job with this clip. But he basically timed them up next to each other, one person trap bar deadlifting and one person doing what I would now call a single leg deadlift. Not a single leg straight leg deadlift, but a single leg deadlift. And again, if you look at patterning, that has more hip dominance to it than knee dominance. And again, does it matter? Yeah, I think semantics matter. So this is the other thing. Actually, I got to write my list. Because this is one of the reasons that we switched the workout organization, because we started realizing that there was more of this posterior chain stuff that we wanted to get done. If you've read any of Franz Bosch's stuff, Bosch talks about this idea of muscle slack. So the best way to understand muscle slack is if we looked at a rope and we just laid the rope on the ground, or we pulled on the rope. By pulling on the rope does not get longer. We just simply take up the slack in the rope. Bosch's thing is that he thinks in sprinting, more of what's going on in the hamstring is this taking up of the slack, this nearly isometric process as opposed to an eccentric contraction. And it's kind of one of those like, maybe he's right. So we started playing around with some of these. This is what I would call a Bosch iso versus a Nordic. And what we did here, the ball is sort of our bow to the PRI people, trying to push people to be a little bit more flexed, because what we found when we get into these iso positions, our athletes are going to lumbar extend like crazy. We give them the ball and we ask them to hug the ball, and it's going to be significantly more difficult for them to be able to get into that position. This would be more of the Nordic idea. So effectively more of an eccentric lower. My thing is I would like to be able to do the Bosch, the iso stuff. I would like to be able to do some eccentric lower. I'd like to be able to mix things up, and I'd eventually like to be able to get to, this is also interesting. This actually was an Australian idea that I saw, but it's amazing when you're just starting to think about hip extension in the presence of isometric hamstring contraction. And then this last piece, again, these are just the portable glute hams, which, did we end up getting, Chris, do we have a portable glute ham here?
Yes.
Those? Okay, yep. So we'll show you those. I love these portable glute hams for one simple reason. And I don't know where, Chris got them from me years ago, but I had glute hams. They take up a lot of space, and I didn't want to give up that much space in the weight room for something that I used for basically 3 weeks of phase. And then suddenly Chris or Rob or somebody found these little portable foam-based ones. So we bought a bunch of these so that when we need to do glute hams, we can actually do it. So we'll kind of go through that progression when we get in the other room. Oh, actually, we don't have to wait. Well, this is interesting. This has nothing to do with what I was talking about, but it's the last slide, so I'm going to jump over it. But that's the VersaPulley. It's actually a pretty cool idea. It's been around for a really long time, but with the newer interest in eccentric training, I think you're going to see more people playing, like K-Box made a pulley version. You're going to see more people come out with these pulleys. This little VersaPulley Mini is a pretty cool little gadget for doing eccentric emphasis stuff. That has nothing to do with anything, but I'm not going to worry about any of that. But what I would say, because we're actually pretty much on time. One thing I just want to finish with before we go in the weight room, before we do the practical stuff, I'll talk about this. We'll give 15-minute breaks so we can let these guys get set up in the weight room, and then we'll go in the weight room probably like 4:05, 4:10. We'll stay in there till 5, and then I'll let you guys out of here. So it'll be a 8:30 to 5 day probably. I think I promised 8:30 to 4:30, but I lied. You can feel free to leave if you're unhappy. But 30 minutes a day, every day, at the end of 1 year, you'd be one of the smartest people in your field. This is what Brian Tracy says. I actually believe this. And if you read 30 minutes a day, every day for 1 year, and you mixed it half personal development and half strength and conditioning stuff, you probably wouldn't be one of the smartest people in your field, but you might be one of the best coaches. So I think that's where you've got to figure out, okay, how do I blend these two? I would tell you, all the books, Charlie Francis, I think, was the only book I put up here that was training related. I think almost everything else that we talked about was really personal development related. And as I said, I think that's a way bigger piece of the puzzle.